Back in 2000, when I was 20, a friend of mine, female 19, decided she wants to get an apartment and asked if I'd be her roommate. I didn't need a place to stay, but decided we'd do it anyway. We moved to a nice apartment complex right next to and behind the house where my aunt saw her dead ex-boyfriend. The place was nice and newer, so the thought of it being haunted never crossed my mind. I didn't even experience anything until my roommate got homesick a month in and had to move back in with her folks, leaving me there alone for about 3 months. It started with the lights coming on by themselves. I would go to bed, always turning the lights off and always closing my bedroom door. I was meticulous about the lights because that's how I was raised. I'd go to bed and at some point my eyes would see light coming in under the door. I thought my roommate came home, so I get out of bed excited to see her, only to discover I was still alone and the dining room or bathroom lights would be on. Then the knocking started. Right after I'd lay down, there would be 3 loud knocks on my bedroom door. Again, I'd think my roommate had come home. I'd get up to greet her, only to see I was still alone. A week or so before Christmas, my roommate and I went out gift shopping and went back to the apartment to wrap everything. When we were done, we were both standing at the door, checking to see if we had everything before leaving. The apartment was completely quiet, and we heard this clearly. My acoustic guitar, which I had leaning up against my wall in the bedroom, with the pick stuck between 3 strings, was plucked. Each string, in succession, then slid along the wall until hitting the floor. We just looked at each other, then walked to my bedroom to find the guitar on the floor, with the pick still stuck between the strings. Those strings had been plucked, meaning the pick had been used, and then replaced when done. At Christmas, during a party with her and some other friends at the apartment, the VCR turned itself off. It did that 1 or 2 other times while living there, never before or after. For Christmas, my girlfriend got me a guitar tablature book for Pink Floyd's The Wall. One night, I sat on the floor of my bedroom learning how to play a song from it. When I was done, I put the pick in the strings and set my guitar up on the wall. But instead of closing the book as I normally did, I left it open and went to bed. Just after laying down, I heard the pages in the book flipping on their own. It was a thick book, but the song I had been learning was somewhere in the middle. I figured the weight of the pages made it change pages on its own. But when they stopped flicking, I got curious and got up to look. The pages stopped flipping on the song Hey You, and when I read the title, I got chills and shut the book, pleaded with the ghost to let me sleep, and I went back to bed. While laying there, I realised if the pages had flipped on their own from the weight, they would have gone the other way, away from that song. After that, I started calling the ghost Pink. Anytime something happened, I would just say, "Oh, hey Pink." But one night, I'd been out with a friend until about 2 a.m, and when I opened my door and stepped in, I could feel the ghost standing there. I said, "Oh, hi Pink," and I could feel the energy go through me and out of the apartment. So that's when I figured it didn't like being called that, which didn't stop me from saying it. Shortly after my roommate came back and stayed the rest of the lease, not much happened then. I figured if an entire house could be haunted, then surely an entire apartment or building could be. I wanted to ask my neighbours if they ever experienced anything, but I never did, and actually never really talked to them at all. And to answer some questions before they happen, my roommate and I are still really good friends. Never dated, never slept together. She was also really good friends with my girlfriend, and it was my girlfriend who told her to ask me to move in with. Also, I've known since I was around 10 or so that I could feel ghosts, but usually only when standing right there where they were. If I stand with them long enough, I usually get an image in my head of what they look like, as well as their mood. In a few instances, I've had them communicate with me like that, their words coming to me as thoughts or images, usually the latter. I usually don't tell people this because they usually don't believe me, and I'd just rather not go through with the ridicule and the name calling. However, with Pink, I never figured out who or what it was. I always felt that it was male, but I'm not sure. I still wonder about it from time to time. My wife used to work at the Great Wolf Lodge in Mason, Ohio. She worked third shift at the front desk for 5 years, and things would happen there constantly. Many times I would take her to work and hang out in the lobby until she got off, instead of making the long drive back home and then back to get her in the morning. Employees she worked with would share stories with me all the time of things that happened to them or to the guests. One room in particular that seems to be the most haunted had reports from guests that something in the middle of the night would jump on their beds. One day, the bathtub overflowed and the water leaked down into the basement. When they checked the room, nobody had been in there, and the room hadn't been rented. It seemed as if a lot of the things that happened there either happened in the lobby or on the first floor. The lobby and the main floor are actually the second floor. Every night they had to print a report and get it from the main office on the first floor. My wife went down the stairs, and while she walked, the elevator started following her from the lobby to the first floor. When she got down there, the doors to it opened, and nobody was on it, nor was there anybody waiting for it. Another night, she had to get the report and was waiting at the doors for the elevator. Behind her, she heard a man say, "You never asked my name." She spun around, but nobody was there. She walked down the halls and found nobody with her anywhere. One night, she got a call from the office, but nobody was supposed to be in there, and it was locked at night. The night shift supervisor went down to check it out with security and found the door to still be locked and nobody in there. That happened quite a bit. One time he came back upstairs from checking, and as soon as he reached the top of the stairs, a phone that sat on the host station at one of the restaurants there rang, so he picked it up. The extension it called from was the office, and he heard nothing but dead air, pardon the pun. A religious man and skeptic, he just laughed it off as he always did, and hung up the phone with a shrug. Another night, she got a call from an extension she didn't recognize, and when she answered it, she heard nothing but dead air. Not even her supervisor knew the extension. After hanging up, she decided to call the extension back, and the phone in front of her supervisor, who sat right next to her at the desk, rang. He picked it up, and they confirmed that it was her that called. Except it wasn't his extension at all, and upon further investigation, they found that extension did not exist anywhere in the hotel. One night I had to use the bathroom, so I walked down the hall off the lobby to the bathroom. As I got it, I looked up and saw someone walking in ahead of me. All I saw was their leg from about the knee down. It appeared to be a white guy, red shorts, white socks and red shoes. I was only a few feet away, yet nobody had been in front of me in the hall, and as I went into the bathroom, I didn't see him. So I looked in each stall and found I was alone. There was absolutely nowhere for him to go. Another night, sometime around Halloween, they had the lobby all decorated and there was a DJ booth. Right around 4:45 in the morning, it began playing a song really loud and scared the hell out of all of us. The supervisor went to shut it off, and after he did, he informed us that it had been off when he came in. I mean, it had been off the whole time I was there too. The place is right next to Kings Island, which is supposed to be haunted, and ghost hunters did a show from there once and found nothing. I'm not sure why they never bothered going to the lodge next door to hunt. They'd probably turn up all kinds of things, and stuff happens regularly there. Maybe the company doesn't want that kind of publicity. Guess I ruined that. Should you ever happen to do some hunting, things seem to happen mostly between 3 and 5 in the morning. I've shared my home experiences, but never my work ones. There is one place I worked for a year that to this day still freaks me out. This place had 2 floors and a basement in use. It was a bakery, and I often worked in the second floor and main floor kitchens alone. I was the only evening baker who worked there, and during the week, especially that left me alone, for about 5 hours, with the exception of the person who worked the front counter. The main and second floor kitchens were normal, nice and well lit. The basement was purely storage, with a door at the stairs that was closed and locked at night. The basement had a walk-in freezer and fridge that was fairly large, with tons of containers, boxes, old equipment, and even holiday decorations. It was a classic unfinished basement though. Super dark, with a couple naked bulbs as the only light sources. Lots of spiders no matter how much we cleaned, and a concrete floor. Basically just dark, dank, and creepy. But we didn't have to be down there much, so it didn't really matter. Now, the front counter attendants were all in agreement. The place was haunted, and there was something especially creepy about the basement. I quickly was enlisted to do all the closing things in the basement, as at the time, I had no fear of it. So I'd go down there, turn off the lights, and close the door at the end of the night. For a while it was fine. Just the occasional thing falling for no reason, maybe a creepy feeling here or there, but nothing that couldn't be explained away. But one night, I went down, and as I turned off the light, the door to the basement slammed shut, leaving me in absolute darkness. I was terrified, but rationalised, door jam must have fallen out. I nervously whispered to myself as I walked over to open it. The second I opened that door, I heard the sound of someone running up behind me. I didn't even look, just rushed through the door and slammed it behind me before rushing up the stairs to where the front counter girl was, so I wouldn't be alone. I didn't want to feed into the general fear, so I kept this to myself for some time, until another co-worker said the exact same thing happened to them on one of my days off. I shared my experience, and from then on, when we worked together, we would close things up together. This, unfortunately, still left me on my own when she was away. On the weekends, I also opened, which meant having 2 days off I would be alone in the bakery from 5 am to 7 am. Part of being the first one in was putting on coffee, and I gladly did, needing the boost of energy to wake me up. As I went to pour myself a cup one morning, I was startled to see a stack of cups fly over, like someone had smacked them. They went all over the floor, one even flying across the counter. I was so early into my shift, I just tried to ignore it. I quickly cleaned up, made my coffee, and got to work, all the while refusing to listen to music as I normally did. I was glancing around, worried something else would happen, and didn't calm down until the next person came in at 7. Now, my final experience came in my last week of working there. I was leaving for a job closer to home, and everything was going well. There was one day, I went to put a tray of something in the freezer and get some containers. As I left the walk-in, I looked to the back of the basement, saw someone step behind a shelf. I knew it wasn't the girl working, as she was much shorter than whoever this was, so I called out another co-worker's name. He often came in to settle a couple of things up, if he forgot to before his shift ended, and it wouldn't be the first time I'd been startled by him showing up. But it wasn't him. As I walked around the basement, it quickly became apparent it was empty, and I had just acknowledged whatever it was in this place. Something I learned much later could be very bad for me. Needless to say, I was very happy to leave and get away from all that. I've worked in quite a few places before and since, many of which people claim are haunted, but never have I worked somewhere where those claims were proven as thoroughly as that place. We'll start with about 2 months ago. I was sleeping in. My boyfriend was already at work. In my half-asleep state, I felt someone's hands as they pulled the blanket over my shoulders and placed my cat right next to my head on the pillow. Now, at first, I figured it was my boyfriend, but when I thanked him later that night, he insisted it wasn't him. I thought maybe he was messing with me, but then I remembered that it had been him he would have kissed my head, and I clearly remember him doing so as he headed out the door sometime earlier. Next was a couple of weeks ago. I was sitting on my couch when a painting that hangs right over where my head was fell. It's not a big painting, but it would have definitely hurt if it smacked me on the head. It didn't though. Instead, it seems like it was pushed aside as it fell, so it ended up landing on the cushion beside me. This isn't the first time things have fallen off the wall. The drywall is very thin, so hanging things can be a challenge. At least now I know there's something looking out for me. And of course the cats. Oh, the cats. Well, those little jerks got in a fight a couple days ago. We were sleeping and very annoyed. I woke up and went to separate them. As my orange tabby tried getting away from her tuxedo brother, he chased her and stopped very suddenly, looking up, like looking at something. They fight like this all the time, but it doesn't stop until you force them away. To my tuxedo cat, it's playing, but the orange tabby doesn't like it. So I usually have to stand right in front of him and make him go somewhere else. I watched him from the stairs as he tried going through the living room doorway to get to where my other cat was, then get stopped and turned around. Like someone put their hands on either side of him and just flipped him around to look the other way. He huffed as cats do and stalked off back to the kitchen. And after saying a quiet thank you to midair, I went back to bed with Tabby trailing behind me. Whatever is in my house seems very kind but strong, which worries me a bit since I don't want to accidentally piss it off and have it come after me. I wonder if it's the ghost of someone who committed suicide, since that is tragically a regular occurrence in the military housing where we live. Background. I grew up in the country. We had lots of strange, bizarre things happen to us during that time. Aliens, paranormal, etc. I lived in a house surrounded by fields and forests and no cable or internet. Not that those were really a big thing back then anyway. So I spent a lot of my time outdoors. This happened when I was in my early teens. My best friend and I were driving to go bring some food to my dad and his friend, who were working late at night on some scrap metal down the way from us. To get where they were, there were two ways to go. One was the normal paved back road, and the second was a long old dirt road that people didn't really go down. The dirt road was surrounded by trees on both sides, had some sketchy older abandoned houses on either side, and a very old cemetery at the end. After we brought the food to them, we decided to take the old dirt road back as a joke. We used to walk that road every now and then during the day, even though it creeped us out, but we tried to stay away from it at night. We were both laughing about how the other one was too scared to go down it. She was driving, and we were laughing and listening to music when we made the turn onto the road. It was a right-hand turn, so in order to make the full turn, she had to sweep her headlights across the cemetery. I remember looking at the graves, and that's when I saw her. It was an all-white figure in the shape of a female with a long dress and long hair. She was standing between the cemetery and the forest. I stared at her for what I felt was 5 or 10 seconds before she vanished, and then I continued to stare at that spot for a good 10 seconds longer. Once I kind of came out of it, I realized that the car had stopped. I have no idea for how long. My friend and I were both very quiet, and we both kind of looked at each other, like, what the hell? Neither one of us really said anything for a little while, but I finally asked her if she had seen something, and she said she did. Not wanting to say what I saw first, I asked her what she saw, and she described the figure exactly as I had above. Interestingly, neither of us were afraid. I remember when I saw her, everything kind of went in slow motion. Even though there was music going on in the car, it was quiet, and I definitely don't remember the car slowing down or stopping. I remember being in awe and thinking she radiated beauty, and she still crosses my mind to this day. I've been back there many times during both the night and day, and I haven't seen anything like it since. We got to the cemetery around 2:30 a.m. and we began walking around. First to the tombstone where the possession happened, which is the oldest part of the cemetery, but nothing happened. We walked around to various other places, including a massive statue of an angel, like being about 15 foot high. I got the heebie-jeebies, but nothing unusual. This cemetery is fairly large, and after this section, we had one more we wanted to check out before we went home. At this time, it was probably about 3:30, 3:45. We approached the final section we had wanted to check, slightly disappointed. This section is near the wood line, for context. As we approach, we start to hear noises over by the wood line. Figured it was probably a rodent or something, nothing unusual, but we check it out anyway, and we don't find anything. Disappointed yet again, we turned to leave. I pass a grave of a soldier that died a long time ago. As I pass, I hear leaves crunching behind me, and my shirt is pulled back to the point it's stretched across my chest. Obviously, at this point, I'm freaking out. I turn around to see if a tree branch could have gotten me, but the only branch near me was about 6 feet above my head. I told my friend, and he said he didn't notice anything. I was in the Marine Reserves at the time. I feel the soldier knew that, and that's why it reached out. Nothing else happened after that, and we left. Like I said, nothing crazy, but that's my 2 cents. This experience happened several years ago, when I was still in elementary school. My dad and I went to visit some relatives on the Blackfeet Reservation, which we did often. When we arrived at my aunt and uncle's trailer, the first thing I did was run in to see my aunt. As I went past the bedroom in the hallway, I noticed an old woman and old man in the room. One was sat next to the bed, and one was laying on the bed. When I reached my aunt, who was in the furthest bedroom, we hugged, and she gave me a kiss. And I asked her who the people were in her daughter's bedroom. My aunt looked at me suspiciously and asked what I meant. I told her that I saw an old man and an old woman in her daughter's room. My aunt became angry and said that I lied, and there was only one person in that room, and that was her father. The woman could not have been in the room because she had died a year before. Later, when my aunt told my dad what I had said, he told her that I couldn't help myself, and that seeing things like ghosts was something children were able to see. I still went to visit my aunts and cousins. I just learned to keep things to myself, knowing that if I were to see something again, it would only frighten some people. My friends lived in a small 2-bedroom house. On occasion, my friend would allow people to stay with her. When this particular incident happened, my friend, we'll call her T, had 3 people living with her. There was a woman, the woman's son, about 3 years old, and her boyfriend. On this particular afternoon, the little boy was laid down for a nap in T's bedroom. About an hour after he went to sleep, the adult in the house was startled by screaming coming from the bedroom the child was in. When T reached the bedroom, she tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The other 2 adults tried as well, but no luck. They could hear the child screaming and saying that there were ugly faces in the wall and that they were trying to get him. The door gave way not too long after they tried to open it, and the boy was rescued, but scared out of his wits. T inspected her bedroom and couldn't find anything that resembled a face or faces. When she called me and asked me to come over, she sounded shaken up, and when I got to her house, she explained what had happened. Context: I think the reason she called me is because of my upbringing. I was raised in a semi-traditional Native American home. My dad was a medicine man, so I had some knowledge about certain religious things, as far as Chippewa Cree and MT are concerned. She explained to me after the incident that the woman's boyfriend had recently learned about his Native American heritage and had delved headfirst into the culture. He really had no idea how to conduct any kind of ceremony, and he had practiced some kind of ritual in T's home. So I concluded that because of what he had done, he may have brought something into her home. Nothing further happened after that day, or prior in my friend's home. Her guests left not too long after that incident, and I will never forget that story. Growing up, I lived in a low-income housing complex. I had heard stories that the apartments were haunted, but I didn't really believe it. Well, one afternoon, my mind was changed. My best friend lived directly behind me in another apartment building, and we hung out so much, she and I became family. We spent the night with each other, I met a lot of her family and vice versa. One day my friend said that her family, herself and 2 of her aunts, were going to the reservation for the weekend, so that left me finding my own entertainment. I was in the front of my apartment playing in the yard, and someone caught my attention in an apartment kitty corner from me. I would clearly see a woman walking back and forth in the bedroom window. The apartment's a two-story. The reason I noticed the woman was the fact that she was wearing pigtails on either side of her head. Now, my friend's aunt had moved into that apartment a few months before, and I knew her. As I watched her walk back and forth a few times, I just shrugged my shoulders and went about my business. When I spoke with my friend a few days later, I'd asked why her aunt was wearing pigtails, because she was older than us, and I thought it was unusual for an adult to wear pigtails. My friend asked, when did I see her aunt in pigtails? And I told her, when you were in Browning. My friend said, my aunt was with me. No one was at her apartment. That was unsettling information, to say the least. In the same apartment building, I had a friend that lived directly across from me. When this instance happened, I was in elementary school. One day, we decided to play together in the front of our apartments. Towards the end of the day, closer to dusk, my friend and I decided to climb a tree that was closer to my apartment. The tree had two large branches that split into a V shape that were large enough for the two of us to climb into and sit. While we were climbing into that area, I recall over and looking into my living room window and saw my dad sitting on the couch watching TV. My friend could see him as well. And for whatever reason, my friend and I stared straight ahead, and we both saw my dad walking from the parking lot into the apartment building across from us. We both looked at each other, and then back in the front window of my apartment, and saw that my dad was still there watching TV. Needless to say, my friend ran home and I ran inside my apartment. Several years later, I ran into my friend, and she said ever since that happened, she was afraid of me, and explained why she never hung out with me again. I guess what we saw was my fault. A few years ago, I was living in an older house in a small university town in northern Idaho. I had been living in that house with 3 other roommates for a few years at that point. My roommates had come and gone. My mental health was an ebb and flow, just like any other person. At this point, my sister was living with me and had experienced her own paranormal things that I was indirectly connected to. But for the purpose of this post, I want to just focus on one particular experience that I had with a little girl. This particular night, I had done my nightly routine, washed my face, brushed my teeth, scrolled through Instagram, the works. It was just like any other night. Eventually, I took my phone out of reach and fell asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night, not completely unusual. I usually wake up once or twice during the night. It's pretty rare for me to sleep through the whole night. Usually, I just turn over and go back to sleep, like usual. But this night wasn't usual by any stretch of the imagination. There's one window in my bedroom which faces the neighbour's porch light. They very rarely turn it off, so there's always a certain amount of light coming through my window into my room. But when I woke up, everything was dark. I didn't immediately think anything of it. I mean, at some point the porch light would have to burn out and be replaced. Honestly, it didn't even cross my mind. Something was up. My anxiety, something I'm medicated for, immediately spiked. My heart began to race, and any ounce of tiredness I had in my eyes was gone as I stared wide-eyed at a little girl. Across from me, crouched by my bookshelf, only about 2 feet tall, maybe less, was a grey little girl. She looked emaciated. Her hair was almost sticky looking and matted. She was wearing a nightdress, think Little House on the Prairie, that was shredded at the bottom and dirty. She was crouched almost like a frog, and it was almost like she was soaking up whatever light there was that was coming from the window, making the room completely dark except for a grey light emanating from her. If that was all it had been, I think I would have just rolled over and gone back to sleep. I had done something similar to a shadow figure over my bed previously, but it was her face. Her face told me she wasn't some innocuous child, spirit, ghost, whatever. She was something awful, and something I needed to fear. Her eyes were very large, and she had no eyebrows. Her matted bangs covered most of her forehead, so I could focus on her white iris and goat pupils. If that wasn't enough, she was smiling at me. But it wasn't a sweet smile, it was a menacing, evil grin. It stretched from ear to ear and bored into my soul. Once I realized what was going on, that there was an evil-looking child in my room, I went into fight or flight. All I could get myself to do was hide underneath my covers. I didn't scream, jump out of my bed and run. Nothing. I was so scared I couldn't move. Eventually, I knocked myself out of whatever terrified trance I was in. I had regulated my breathing and my heart rate went back to normal. I peeked out from under my covers and saw that there was nothing there. I was so relieved and figured that somehow a bad dream had kind of leaked into real life for a moment. I got up from my bed, weary but confident that it was an absolutely terrifying dream. I decided if it was a dream, I would go downstairs to grab a glass of water. When I have bad dreams and I don't move around, I can get sucked back into it. And from my reaction to this one, I absolutely did not want to do that. So I got my glass of water, climbed back up the stairs and walked down the hall to my bedroom and put a half full glass of water on my windowsill. I didn't have anything else to put it on by my bed. The entire house was silent. I managed to fall asleep again. I don't know how much later, but I woke up again. The room was again so dark. I immediately knew something was wrong. Again. I searched for the little girl across the room by my bookshelf, and she wasn't there. I was relieved, but I knew there was something off. Slowly, I realized that there was light coming from the side of my bed, and it was that grey light. I turned my gaze downward to the edge of my bed, and there were those eyes. Those white goat's eyes and the sticky, matted bangs. Then there was that smile. I could feel the weight of that glass of water on my bladder at that moment. The menacing, evil smile stretching ear to ear. I couldn't see the rest of her body. She was so close to me. All I could see was her eyes, looking up at me, and the enjoyment she was receiving from scaring the ever-living shit out of me. This time I screamed. I yelled my sister's name and threw the covers back over my head and cried. This wasn't right. I'd done everything right. I went and got a glass of water. I shouldn't still be in this awful dream. I don't know how long I stayed under the covers. I must have eventually fallen asleep, because the next morning, I woke to the morning sunlight streaming through my windows and birds chirping outside. It took a minute to remember what had occurred the night before. I immediately went to tell my sister what happened, and that I was very annoyed she didn't come to my rescue. After I told my sister, I came back into my room and noticed that the glass of water had fallen onto the carpeted floor. So I did get a glass of water. I wasn't just dreaming. I must have knocked it over when I reacted so fearfully to the second approach from the girl. Anyways, that's what happened. I'm wondering if anyone else has had an experience with something similar. A ghost girl? My cousin suggested it was a demon in the form of a girl, feeding off of my fear. I'm not so sure about that, but I'm sure of one thing. I never want to see her again. It was 10 years ago, and I was 15 years old. Me and a couple of friends were staying the night at my best friend's house, and we had the house to ourselves, although we had to look after my best friend's sister, who was 3 at the time. So it was around 9 p.m. My friends all went outside to smoke, while I stayed inside to keep an eye on my best friend's sister. I was sitting on a couch with the TV to my right, and the sister was to my left on another couch facing the TV. While I was watching the TV, I suddenly felt terrified. It was a paralyzing fear, like I had come face to face with a dangerous predator. And so I looked over the 3-year-old to find she was already staring at me. And she looked just as terrified, with tears running down her face. She then looked in front of me, so I too looked where she was looking. And that's when I saw it. A couple of meters in front of me was a shadow floating just below the ceiling. My fight-flight response kicked in, and I immediately jumped the couch and ran for the back door and completely forgetting about the little girl. I ran outside screaming for my friends. They came running, and when we ran back inside, when I got inside, I saw the sister was not in the living room. And then she came running out of the hallway, screaming and crying. The entity had gone. I don't know if what I saw was a demon or just an angry spirit, but the guilt of being so afraid I abandoned a 3-year-old stayed with me for a long time. And from then on, I became a superstitious person. They still live there to this day, and I don't like visiting, even though I feel no presence when I'm there. When I was little, my parents said I used to say I played with a little boy in the basement. My brother is 5 years older than me. It started when I was 6. I remember putting my shoes on with my dad to head to the gas station and looking down into the basement. At the very back where my brother's room was, there was a small dark shadow outside his door with glowing red eyes. My dad said, "Do you see it too?" We left. About a year later, I moved into the basement across hall from my brother's room. It was my first night down there. I remember waking up one day and seeing a little girl staring at me with red eyes. I was so scared, I couldn't even scream. I tried. I was crying though. My brother heard me crying and came out of his room to get me and our parents. The figure disappeared, of course. After that, I moved back upstairs next to my parents. My brother never reported seeing or hearing anything. Growing up, my household was hectic. A lot of darker energy could reside there, I think, based on what was happening there at the time. I don't feel comfortable going into it. I often escaped by PC gaming right after school and late into the night. I'd usually have headphones on one ear and off the other just in case my mom needed me or something got in the house. At this point, I heard a man's voice whenever I was in the basement. Gaming, it was speaking in a language I couldn't understand. I wonder if maybe I was making it up. The computer desk was right across the laundry room, which also had a bathroom on the other side of the laundry room. So it goes me, laundry room, bathroom. The door to the laundry room suddenly started to swing open and closed, and the light in that room would switch on and off. Sometimes I thought maybe I left the light on when I went to the bathroom. After a while, I double checked I'd turned the light off, but the door would open and the light would turn on. I asked the spirit, dumb I know, but I was about 15 at this point, to keep the light off when I go to bed. And it did. Back to Mom's house. This time, I was upstairs. Basically, we have a living room with a hallway that leads to the bedrooms. It has 3 chairs and 1 little table for cups. I was in the chair facing the hallway. It was about 3 a.m. I was gaming with my headphones on as not to bother my mama. I look up and saw this glowing gold outline that was shaped exactly like my mom. I took off my headphones and said, "Mom?" But it kept walking from the hallway, past the chairs, and through the table next to me. I don't even know why I called out to it. Obviously, people don't have a glowing gold outline, but that was just strange. Once I was at my dad's house with his new family. I lived in the room next to the parents, then my brother and my sister. The bathroom is across from my room. I had gotten back from school one day and was calling out for my stepmom. Usually she was upstairs in her room. I looked inside her room and saw a shadow of a woman with her hair in a bun, just like my stepmom's. And I walked in and started talking to my stepmom only. She wasn't in her room at all. Upstairs, toys would also go off constantly with no one there. My stepmom was pregnant, so my sister and I had to move down into the basement. We lived in a 3-story. In the basement, I got the bedroom and my stepsister got the bigger open room. There was a bathroom down there, but the hallway had mirrors on both sides of the wall completely. I'd often find big handprints on the mirrors. and I'd hear footsteps walk from my door to the hallway to the bathroom and back all night. It sounded like shuffling. One night the thing sat on the counter of my bed. I felt the pressure of it sink in the corner of my fucking bed. I can't tell you how scared I was. My sister experienced the footsteps too. Sometimes we would sleep in the same bed. She said she would see a man standing in a room. I also once saw a big handprint on my bed and a baby handprint, which I think was my baby brother. This one was the scariest to me, of my minor stories. My sister and I were on the middle floor. It was about 11 or 12 at night. We were watching a horror flick, and we look over to the left and see a dark figure of a boy standing next to the stairs. My sister pauses the movie and says, "Matt, go upstairs," in a stern voice. It doesn't move, which confirmed to me I wasn't the only one who saw it. She then says again, "Matt!" Nothing. She goes to turn on the light, and it's gone. We were spooked the fuck out. Decided to turn on a different movie. I think a kid's show, lol. This was my sophomore year of high school, living in a small Utah town at the time. And a pretty avid believer in things like this, despite not having any major experiences up until this point. I was in my weightlifting class and had to go take a piss, so I left and the only bathroom that was open was the one in the guy's locker room. So I go in and down a few steps, start playing music from my phone that I left on the bench as close to the toilets as possible, which was on the opposite side from where my backpack and jacket were. I do my business, clean up, and grab my phone before going back to the steps that led out. But around halfway there, I turned my phone off, and when I got to the steps, I felt something behind me, barely breathing down my neck, and not anything nice from what I could tell. I freaked out and ran back to the weights room as fast as I could. The rest of class, I kept an eye on the door, just in case anyone came or went so I could ask them if they felt anything like I did. But nobody left, which makes it all the more haunting when we all went back after class and my bag was on the floor and my jacket was on the other side of the room. I froze when I saw it, and it took two of my friends to snap me out of it. So yeah, that's probably one of my biggest anything when it comes to ghosts and stuff. Once again, this was my sophomore year, and I was in the theatre department working backstage. We were doing Beauty and the Beast and wanted to see how many people were out. And since we couldn't walk out on stage, we had to improvise. There was a large mesh speaker front attached to the wall, facing out towards the crowd that you couldn't see behind. But the only way to look through it was to climb up a ladder and led to the catwalks where someone had reportedly fallen from and died when hitting the chairs beneath. Me and a friend of mine, let's call him Jack, climbed partway up the ladder and looked out into the crowd. Full house that night. But we both decided to look up and saw the silhouette of a man's upper torso peering over the edge at us before shooting backwards out of sight. The two of us, reasonably, freaked out and ran down the ladder. Everyone freaked out when they saw us and asking what was happened. But we didn't have time to explain, because we had to get in place to start the show. Backstory. I was never really that close to my uncle. He stayed about an hour and a half drive away, but was close enough to like him. He was awesome, but he took his own life in 2011, which was a major blow to my entire family. He was one of those guys that everyone loved. He wasn't really into religion, but also didn't knock anyone's beliefs. Main story, at my mum and dad's old place, they had a canvas picture of a Buddha hanging on the wall between their bedroom and the bathroom wall. For easiness, to try and picture it, you go to the top of the stairs and the spare room is in front of you. Small corner piece of wall, and then my mum's bedroom, large enough space for the picture, then bathroom door, then my bedroom. The picture had been hanging up for months, and my mum got bored of it, so she took it down and put up a picture of the rose. The first night was fine. The second night, there was only me in my room, my mum in bed and dad downstairs watching TV. All of a sudden, there was an almighty bang. I got up, thinking my mum had fallen out of bed again, haha. But as soon as I walked out my door, I could see the picture of the roses not on the wall, but at the top of the stairs. My first thought was I had sleptwalked, so I went into her room and she was awake. I asked if she heard the noise. She said yes. Asked what it was, so I told her. The next day, we put the Buddha picture back up, and it never dropped once. So my grandpa has this ranch about 25 miles east of Payson, Arizona. For those in Arizona, it's between Hagler Creek and the 260. It's very secluded, but the land is good for grazing. I spend a lot of time running Jersey cattle on the range. Every night one of us rides out to check on the cattle in the field and to check the fence line for holes in the wire. A few days ago, I was riding out to check on the herd at about 1:30 a.m. and I kept hearing rustling in the tree line running along the fence perimeter. Figured it was coyotes or squirrels. I see a lot of them up there. It went away every 10 or 15 minutes, and then I could hear it again. The second time I heard it, I was off my horse and walking him to a little water trough. The cows were about 150 to 200 yards away, just within my view within the moonlight. I heard the rustling again, but this time it was heavy. Me and my horse Vegas both looked up at the same time, wondering what the fuck we were hearing. At this point, I came to the eerie realization that whatever was out there was tracking me in Vegas. It didn't seem so interested in the cows. So in an attempt to scare it off, I got back on my horse and grabbed my whip and uncoiled it. I don't use it on animals, I only use it to make a loud noise to move cattle, and cracked it a few times rather than using my pistol. The rustling stopped and the forest was dead quiet once more. Not thinking much about it, I went back to count the head. I marked 38 heads. All the cows were there. I started my way back to the house. I was about 3.5 miles away. It's a bit of a trial ride to get back. It was about 10 minutes of silence until I heard the rustling again. At this point I was getting pissed. I figured it was some dumb little ass coyote thinking we were going to lead him somewhere. So I called my grandpa on my radio, there's zero service out there whatsoever, and told him I was going to find my gun so he didn't get worried. So I reached down and pulled my revolver from my side. For all you guys who like firearms, it's an Uberti replica Colt 45 Peacemaker chambered 45 Colt. And I fired one round into the air. The rustling stopped as the shot rang out through the woods and mountains. My ears rang and the smell of gunpowder filled my nose as the smoke settled. After I calmed Vegas down, I started riding back, only for the rustling to come back 5 minutes later. I started getting really nervous at this point because usually coyotes run away when they get scared by a loud noise. I didn't have a flashlight on me because I'm dumb and I forgot. So I used my lame ass iPhone flashlight and dismounted. I slowly walked to the tree line where I heard the rustling as I had my gun out, ready for an animal to jump at me or something. I flashed my light around through clearing in the trees. And to my right, I heard rustling about 100 feet away and turned over, and to my surprise and confusion, I saw a black silhouette of a horse run across the trail. I immediately thought, shit, is that one of our horses? That's someone else's horse? So I rode over to where I saw the horse, shaking with anxiety. I looked over and was confused as to how a horse even ran out of and into the forest because it was so thick with shrubbery. And when I looked back behind me and started riding back, I stopped frozen in fear as I got the chills. I dropped my gun and heard the sound of it hitting the ground echo through the woods, because in front of me, about 50 feet away, was the silhouette of a man wearing a flat brim hat and appeared to have chaps on. I picked up my gun and aimed at the figure, and it was gone. I got back on Vegas and rode like the wind to get out there, constantly looking behind me in fear of it following. I made it back and told my grandpa, who was trying to calm me down, and said he's had some weird experiences too. My mother went to Eastern Washington University and stayed in one of the houses the locals rented out to college students. I cannot give the exact age of the house, but it was old enough to have a built-in button on the floor that would call up to the servants in the attic, so the house was relatively old. During her studies there, she had three different roommates. My uncle was the first, who was then replaced by my mother's best friend, who was then replaced by my father. All three of them can confirm strange happenings in this house and be woken up in the middle of the night with people whispering. The worst of it was in my mother's room in the attic. My mother hated that house, but she didn't have anywhere else to live, and the dorms were expensive, so she sucked it up and lived there until she graduated. She hated sleeping alone. The air in her room constantly felt thick and heavy. Her closet was constantly freezing cold, and at night, she would hear multiple people whispering incoherent words at once. While living there, my mother had a cat named Puss who would constantly hide under the bed. One time, my mother caught Puss out from under her bed, sitting, watching, and growling at one of the corners of the room. My mother went over to Puss confused at what she was looking at, until she saw a black figure in the corner slowly start to move upwards toward the ceiling. Puss started to become more aggressive, her hissing and growling getting louder, before she freaked out and shot off back under the bed, still growling at the corner until the black figure was gone. My mother had never seen Puss act like this, since Puss was usually a very lovey and happy cat, but whatever that was clearly terrified her. Sometime later, my mother was talking with a friend who was excited to be touring two famous paranormal investigators around the college and town, showing them and supposed haunted places. My mother brought up the fact that she has always had weird stuff happening in her house and thinks it may be haunted. Her friend got excited and begged her to let her bring to the house. My mother refused since she wasn't willing to stay up late for some people that didn't even know. My mother didn't know at the time who these investigators were, since she never really kept up with paranormal stuff, believing it can let evil into your life. She only knew that they were on quite a few popular talk shows at the time. These two investigators were Ed and Lorraine Warrens. Around midnight, my mother's best friend comes to her and tells her that there are people at the door wanting to speak to her. Confused, my mother got in her robe and went to the front door. There, she saw her tour guide friend with 12 other students behind Ed and Lorraine Warren. Lorraine asked my mother if they could come in, as their guide told them that it's possible her house was haunted. My mother agreed and let them all in. Lorraine asked my mother where in the house is the haunting most, and my mother told her that it was her bedroom, that she would take Ed and Lorraine there, but everyone else had to wait. They agreed, and my mother took Ed and Lorraine to her room. When my mother entered her room, she sat on her bed and asked if they could feel it, how heavy the air was. They both agreed that the air was heavy, like how some of the haunted places they've been to. Lorraine walked around the room, then to the closet, and asked if she could hear voices here. My mother broke down crying and said she could hear them every night, and that it kept her up at night. Lorraine told that it was possible that her closet is a doorway for those who passed on, or a doorway to hell. My mother continued to cry before Lorraine came over to her and told her that the reason this stuff is happening to her is because of her mom's family, that the women have some connection with those beyond, and that it's possible that they're psychics, which makes the dead attracted to her. My mother then told Lorraine about the black figure, which Lorraine told her wasn't from this house, but was connected to her family, mainly her dad's side, and that it most likely went after her grandfather, her father, and now her. The figure isn't a ghost or a demon, but something pure evil, and that it wants her. Fearful, my mother asked them if they could bless her room, which they did, and after further investigation of the house, Ed and Lorraine told her that her house was the first place that actually showed activity and signs of haunting in the whole area. After they finished blessing the house, Ed and Lorraine left. Time passed, and my mom's best friend moved out and my dad moved in. The activity in the house still continued, even after the blessing. At first, my father was skeptical of the house being haunted, Until one night, while sleeping in my mom's bed, he heard the whispering. He asked my mother what she said, and she told him she didn't say anything. After a few moments of silence between them, she asked if he could hear them. Confused, my father asked what she was talking about, and she told him the whispering. He then agreed that she heard the whispering and asked where it was coming from, which he then told her it was from the closet and it happens every night. Sometime after, my father got curious about whether or not the servants button still worked. Originally, no one had ever been up into the attic. Both of my parents made their way up to the attic, but never reached the top, since on their way there, both of my parents felt like they couldn't breathe as the temperatures dropped to the freezings, and my mother started to panic as she felt like she was being choked. She quickly told my father to turn back around because it felt as though they were not wanted up there. Not wanting to upset my mother more, my father turned back and never went up there again. Once my mother graduated college, they moved out of the house and strange events continued to occur, no matter where they moved. Around the time I was born, my parents lived in a rather small house with my two older brothers. Constantly, our cats would freak out, growling and hissing at the corners of the house. Not only that, but my mother would constantly see this black figure around the house. Later, my family had our new house constructed and we moved out of our old one. These strange events followed us and got worse. One day, when I was around 5, I was walking outside my room to walk downstairs. The moment I walked to the balcony, I felt someone grab my arm extremely roughly. I turned around and I just see a black figure holding my arm. I screamed for my mother. She came running upstairs and she sees the black figure. She grabs my arm and tries to pull me away, but the figure wouldn't let go. She pulled as hard as she could and ripped me away from the figure. As she does, the figure disappears and a giant hand mark is left on my arm. My mother runs downstairs and screams at my father to get my brothers, and that they're leaving the house until it's blessed. We later had a priest come to our house and bless it. Afterward, the activity stopped, but growing up, me and my second older brother would constantly have nightmares of this figure in our dreams, doing awful things to us, but it had bright red eyes and would chase us. Nothing else has happened since then, and I still live in the house. But every once in a while, I get this sudden fear from the staircase. I never go downstairs at night without the lights on, out of fear of this thing that's possibly still there. I'd spoken to my mother about the dreams and stuff that happened to her, but she tries to avoid talking about it, since she believes the more we talk about it, the more it will come back. She's told me that though she spoke with my grandfather about this figure, who refused to talk about it since the first time she brought it up, he went pale as a ghost. He said that the figure used to torment him as a child, and his dad would tell him about the figure and how it would come for him, as it did with him. My mother didn't realise that it was Ed and Lorraine Warren until we were watching a documentary about them, and she points out that they were the ones who came to our house. I was speechless, and she was confused as I told her that they were the Ed and Lorraine Warren, the most famous paranormal investigators, that they were the ones who started publicly doing investigations, and there were famous horror movies that involved them. My mother freaks out and tells my father about it, and while my father was shocked, he didn't think much of it. I apologise if my story is a little all over the place, but this was my best attempt to explain my mother's story and my experience, since my mother doesn't like to talk about it, much out of fear. I live in a small condo or apartment. It's about 500 square foot, and it has no shady history. It was built in the 80s. We knew who the last owners were, and they owned it for a decade and are definitely still alive. We've been here for almost 4 years. It's just me and my husband. Husband and I were getting ready for bed. I was out for a smoke, so he did his teeth and all that before me, and got into bed maybe 5 minutes or less before I got inside from the porch. You can see the door to the bathroom from the kitchen, but it's partially blocked off by a half wall, separating the kitchen from the entrance hall, and then the bathroom at the other side. So I walked to the sink to grab some water. I saw a figurehead into the washroom, and then heard what sounded close to dry heaving, like that gurgle backwash sound that someone makes when they might puke but haven't quite done it yet. The door to the bathroom was still open,
but I couldn't see the toilet from where I'm standing. Knowing my husband is fairly private for that stuff, I stood there for a moment and listened. I heard more gurgling and dry heaving. He didn't come out, so I slowly crept up to the door to ask if he was okay, while still trying to maintain his privacy by not seeing the toilet. He replied from the bathroom, down the hall. He asked me to repeat what I said because he hadn't quite heard me. Confused, I went fully into the bathroom and there was no one there. I would just chalk up to the toilet or shower making noises, but I definitely thought I saw someone walk in there, and then the noises happened for a good half a minute after. So I'm feeling like I'm losing my mind. My name is Agnaldo Alreiroz. I'm 44 years old and I live in Brazil. I'm new to Reddit, and this is my first post. I apologise in advance for my limited English. I would like to share my story and have your opinion. When I was 20 years old, the year was 1996. A couple friends of my mother lost their home, and as Brazil was going through a very severe economic crisis at the time, and my mother seeing the situation of the couple, she invited them to temporarily live in our house. They slept in the living room, on a mattress, and the guy was an alcoholic. He often fought with his wife. When he came home from the street, tired from work, he was always a person very nasty and grumpy, and always drunk. My brothers and I kept some distance from him to avoid getting upset, but this guy always harassed us and said bad things, which hurt us. A few days later, we convinced our mother to send this couple away, but they just left because he and his wife stole money from my mother. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been kicked out of our house. So on the day they left home, this couple stayed outside the house in the car, packing their bags. And my brother and I, we went in and out of the house with their bags, and they were packing in the car. It so happens that there was no one in the house, except me, my brother, and the couple who were on the streets, in the car. There was an old stereo in our house, which was ours, in the back room. And when we were on the street, together with the couple, delivering another batch of bags, this sound turned into a rock, very high. The four of us on the street looked at each other in amazement, and we commented, how can this happen? Since there was no one in the background. It was just the four of us, and we were on the streets at the gate. Then we entered the house, and I myself not only turned off the stereo using the power off button, but I also unplugged it, because I was very scared. We took the last bags, and again in the streets, the sound turned on the same song, for the second time, very loud. Well, I turned it off myself. I unplugged the power cord. That's unbelievable. We dropped the bags on the floor with the couple and ran to see how this happened. And to our surprise, in addition to the sound being turned on, the wire was plugged into the socket. Well, I'm a skeptical person and I'm not mystic, but I can't deny what I saw that afternoon. And really, I can't explain how it happened. I can assure you there was no one in the house but the four of us, and both times the stereo turned on itself. And it's a mystery. I can't solve it inside my head, as I've already thought about it, but it's inconclusive. The witnesses in the case directly are me and my brother, and the couple who testified indirectly that day. This happened about 3 years back now. My friend and I were 15 and 14 at the time, me being the older one. In 2019, my friend, who I will call Nim, was house-sitting a friend's dogs. The family lived in the country, and most cars we saw drive by there were less than 5. Nim was staying the week watching 4 labs. He knew the house was haunted because they'd hear the occasional footsteps on the stairs, or the dogs would start barking at the staircase and be too scared to go up them. They spent the first night along, the next 3 nights with our other friend. The friend got too freaked out because they started seeing people staring at them through the windows, while outside, or they'd hear laughter and talking upstairs. The friend left, and Nim invited me to stay the last 3 days with them. Nim told me the house was haunted and everything that had happened. I'd never had any bad experience with the paranormal before, so I wasn't really worried. We were sleeping in the living room, and the first night, nothing really went on. The second night, we heard footsteps go up the stairs, and sometimes we heard someone talking, but neither of us really minded. We both have always been believers, and neither of us wanted to upset any spirits that were possibly there, so we didn't talk about it. The third night was when shit hit the fan. Nim's dad had ordered us pizza, and we sat on the road while eating it. Nim had sent me inside to get something, maybe cups. I went straight to the kitchen and went back out. To get to the kitchen, we had to pass by the living room, but we wouldn't have been anywhere near the windows. When I went back out, Nim asked if I sat on the couch and looked at them through the window. I simply told them no, and we shrugged it off and continued eating. Nim had gone inside because neither of us remembered to grab napkins. I'm generally the protective friend, so I watched Nim go in case they got too freaked out or in case they tripped. I looked at the same window they saw me in, and I saw them looking at me as well. When Nim came out, I asked if they did what I did, and they said no. I went to the bathroom first, then grabbed the napkins, and then came straight out. The bathroom was in the kitchen. Fast forward, we go inside, and Nim was fast asleep on the couch. It was an L shape, so it was fairly big. I had 3 of the labs with me, one by my head, another by my feet, and another on the floor next to me. It was past midnight, and I was scrolling through my phone. I heard the youngest lab next to me growling at the arched doorway, and when I looked, he was stood up and staring at the doorway. The one at my feet was stood up on the couch, but not growling, while the one by my head was still laying down. He was looking at the doorway like the other 2. I didn't care too much as I had heard footsteps running up the stairs and giggling all night, so I thought they were growling at the stairs. I only actually looked at the doorway when the oldest by my head had climbed over my legs and was growling. I turned off my phone and sat up. When I looked where they were, I saw a black figure standing there. There was enough shining in the dining room to outline the figure. Of course, I panicked a bit, because it just supposed to be Nim and I didn't move from the spot even when the thing looked at me. I don't know how long I held eye contact with it. All I knew was I was too scared to move from my spot. I felt like I was paralyzed. The 3 dogs by me had all stood up and were staring at the figure. 2 were growling and 1 was whimpering. I didn't realize it was walking towards me until it got to the door frame. That's when I finally moved and jumped over to Nim and woke them up. The 4th dog woke up since they were cuddling with Nim, and the other 3 still looked angry or upset at the doorway. I tried telling Nim what happened and even played out to them what I saw. I don't know if they believed me, but I'm sure me having a panic attack and almost crying from fear was convincing enough. Nim stayed up with me and I didn't sleep until I got back home. I don't think I've ever been so happy to leave a place. My first paranormal encounter was when my mum's college lost her daughter in a car accident, and she was feeling so guilty, blaming herself about the loss of her daughter. Later on, found a person, who I'm going to address as the lady, could help her to communicate with her daughter's spirit. So, the sorrowful mother managed a seance, the type where they summoned spirits through a host body, and invited my parents and also a bunch of other people, including her colleagues. That night, I accompanied my mom too. We need a host body, as that spirit can possess, the lady said. My mom, without any hesitation, volunteered. It's kind of blurry for me, but as far as I remember, my mother knew my father wouldn't let her come forward. So before volunteering, she told my father to get my brother here too, because he's home alone. Fast forward to a couple of minutes later, as my mom was lying on her back with her eyes closed and palms facing up. She suddenly started saying some words. The lady looked at us and said a lost ghost had possessed my mom's body. The ghost, as the lady said, was a man, and my mom started mumbling slowly and said, "Give me the book." The lady said she's asking for the Quran. As we handed her the Quran, the lady puts it on my mom's chest with her hands placed on the book. He started reciting some random verses in Arabic. Afterwards, my mom prostrates, lying stretched out on the ground with one's face downwards, to every cardinal direction as if he was praying. I was a little kid and didn't know what was going on though. But if stumble upon this scene now, I would wet my pants. The lady threatened the ghost that if you do not leave this body, I will do blah. Cannot remember what she said. Before I forget, let me mention that her daughter's name is Mardi. Eventually, the lady looked back at us and said, I believe she is Mardi. They first asked her name and my mom very slowly, with a voice of a dehydrated person, said, Mardi. Next, the lady asked her to write down her name on a piece of paper given to her. She barely wrote, Mardi. I remember vividly, it was like a kid's handwriting. Her mom couldn't contain herself anymore, and in a quavering voice said, Baby, it's all my fault. Forgive me. I shouldn't have let you go out that night. I'm sorry. I love you, Mom, her daughter said. I have to go, she continued, as if somebody was calling her. Years later, when my mom was retelling the story, I asked her, So, where were you the whole time? Somewhere bright and white as far as the eye can see. And I saw heads floating around with no body attached to them, just faces, she replied. I don't remember whether she mentioned that she saw her father or not. That's one of the paranormal experiences, and I've encountered them myself, too. Back when I was 18, my friends and I decided to go on a trip to some rural area to relax on our own for a couple days. Luckily, my late grandparents owned a medium-sized house in a remote village. There are plenty of those where I'm from. So I got the keys from my dad and we packed food, water and a first aid kit and we headed there. It was a 2-hour ride from the closest city to get there. The car dropped us off in the middle of nowhere and told us to walk in a straight line until we get to the village. After about 30 minutes walk, we reached our destination. It was nothing fancy, but the village was definitely bigger than expected. Dogs, chickens and goats roamed around freely. I was a city boy, so that was a first for me. We got to my grandparents' house and settled in. We spent the first few days of resting, then decided to go to a spot that my father told me about the next morning. We headed out at daybreak. We packed plenty of water. The spot was close by, so we didn't think to pack any food. After about a 30-minute walk in the middle of a heavily wooded mountain, we got to our destination. It was a beautiful area with a huge tree and amazing view, but it wasn't enough for the 5 young idiots who came there to explore. So we kept moving forward, just looking around and having fun. But without realizing it, we had spent an extra hour and a half up there. We were exhausted and more importantly hungry, so we decided to head back. We followed the trail back, but we never reached that big tree again, even after an hour of fast walking. We began to panic and went from fast walking to jogging, but for some reason, even though we should have been backtracking, we didn't make it to the tree. It was there that we spotted an old woman walking the trail. We quickly approached her, said hello and asked her how close the village. She looked at us weirdly and told us we were walking the opposite way and that the village was like a 3-hour walk. We were super exhausted by that point. 3 of us could barely stand, let alone walk for 3 hours. We explained to the old woman about our situation after she asked, and she offered us to rest at her place as it was close by, get a meal so we could get home safely. One of my friends, Adam, and I protested that it might be a bad idea to follow a stranger, even though we were in a rough situation. But between the hunger and the state of the others, we gave in and agreed. We followed her towards her cabin, small with a tiny garden in front of it and a goat tied to the post next to the door. Overall, it was nothing out of the ordinary in these parts of the country. We got in and sat down on those long sofas with no back support. She told us to wait while she got us some food. The cabin was very clean. The tables, chairs and sofas were obviously old and worn out, but not dusty, and overall the place looked very welcoming. However, Adam and I didn't fully drop our guard, while the others were simply happily they got a soft thing to sit on. 15 minutes later, she came out of the kitchen with 2 big plates of chicken with vegetables. A plate of salad and some olive oil came. She poured us tea, and we dug in as she went back to the kitchen to prepare more. I was considering not eating, at least until I saw the others ate and are still good, but my hunger took over, and I went right in as soon as the plates hit the table. Adam, however, didn't. He didn't lay a finger on the food, nor the tea. He was very paranoid, and was the most fit out of all of us, so we managed to hold back. She brought 2 more plates of food that we cleaned up. She brought more tea, and told us to rest and digest the food and leave whenever we felt like it. She then excused herself and went to her room to sleep as she was tired from cooking. We drifted off to sleep one by one. As I set up an alarm clock to ring after 30 minutes so we can move, I was the last one to drift to sleep, talking to Adam, who said he's going to stay awake and look around for a bit before we move. I was shaken awake by my friends who looked worried. I snapped awake after I saw their faces, and I looked around and asked them what was going on. One of them points out of the window and tells me to look. I didn't get it at first, but then I noticed. It was sunrise. I almost had a heart attack. I thought we overslept for a whole day, but it was worse. Adam was nowhere to be found. We went out of the cabin and called out, but no answer. So I went back in to ask the old woman. I knocked on the door to the room she went in before I fell asleep, but I got no response. The door was locked, so I decided to excuse myself and go in. When I did, it was the first time since I went on this trip that I was in full panic mode. There was no bed in that room. In fact, there was nothing. Like nothing at all, just 4 walls and a door. The kitchen was the same as well. I ran to my phone to try and call Adam. The signal there was weak, but it still worked, but my phone was off. Dead battery. It was around 70% when I fell asleep. All of our phones were dead, so we got out and started running on the trail towards the village while calling Adam's name. After a while, we met some people from the village, my grandparents' neighbours. They looked almost scared when they saw us. Then they dropped this bomb on all of us. Where were you the past 3 days? I was shocked. I was missing for 3 days. My parents got concerned because I didn't answer the phone and called those neighbours to ask about me. They even reported me missing. The whole village was looking for us for 2 days. We asked for help finding Adam, but after we told them what happened, they took us to a local mosque so that Imam could look into it. They believed it was witchcraft. We went back there the next day with some men from the village looking for Adam. We showed them the cabin and its surroundings. We looked for hours on end, but there was no sign of him. And anywhere we gave up when the police took over, even they couldn't find much. To this day, I still wonder what happened. I am religious, but I just can't accept that that woman was a witch. Even if she was, why only Adam? Why not all of us? Is it because he didn't eat? Or because he went snooping around her cabin? A part of me wants to get back there so I can uncover the truth. But every time I think about this incident, I just feel a crippling fear of that fucking cabin. Towards the end of April, my boyfriend and I moved into a historic mansion. Of course, it's haunted. We expected it to be. I've been in tune with energies since I was younger, and have experienced paranormal encounters most of my life, but this is something I've never come across. A little backstory about the place. It was built in 1850, it's converted into an apartment complex. We live on the 3rd floor, and it's attic. The walls are small, and it's got a very vintage feeling. My neighbours told me that the mansion was built in 1850, and that was about it. As soon as we walked into the building, I knew something was there, but I didn't feel evil or bad. I was picking up a young female in her 20s. I could see she had brown hair, brown eyes, and wearing a lace purple dress. I also saw an old woman at the staircase, wearing a black veil and a black dress. Her face seemed to be hardened, like she was angry. I want to say she died of a stroke. In my dreams, I saw a young man, maybe in his 30s, with a black beard, green eyes, and a toddler wearing a white shirt, overalls, and black pants. I assume this home belonged to a family a while back. I never thought anything of it. My friends that came over would claim to have been watched, and they really don't like the staircase where the old lady stands. Since we've moved in here, we've heard knocking above us. We have an attic in our attic. I don't know, that's weird. And things have been moved or turned on. One night, when we had some friends over, we played Mario Kart, and the TV turned off completely. I told Sam, the young lady in a purple dress, to turn the TV back on, and sure enough, she did. Also, I'm not too sure if this is her real name, but it's the first thing that popped into my mind when I saw her. I would also like to point out, the minute we moved in, I burnt Palo Santo out in the living rooms, and all the rooms. And if you're familiar with black salt, I made sure to put some on every window in the house, including my son's. So everything is going fine and normal in our new place, until last night. Me and my family and my good friend were staying the night with us for a bit, because we're in the middle of a heat wave, and she has no AC in her apartment. We had a thunder and lightning storm. After I woke up with it, my baby was wide awake in pain, because he's 8 months old and has his 2 button teeth coming in. So I thought he was in pain. We are all sleeping out in the living room, on the floor near the AC. My boyfriend and I decided to put our son in his crib, since his fussiness wasn't going down. For some reason, I had a strange feeling that I needed to check the baby monitor, so I did. I have our monitor connected to my phone, and I go and open the app. As I hear my baby playing in his crib, laughing and talking, I see that there's something moving on the left side of the screen. I go to examine the figure on my phone for a minute, until I realised that what I saw moving wasn't a bug. It was too big to be a bug. Then my second thought was maybe it's a dust particle. I then realised that dust particles don't move that fast. Unless, of course. Unsure of what to make of this, I showed my boyfriend who was laying next to me. We both examined the monitor, and we both concluded that what we were seeing were orbs. We both entered in the room, and as soon as we do, this salt lamp flickered. Then it started to get cold. We both felt the salt lamp, and it was freezing. And remember, we're in the middle of a heat wave. All of a sudden, I get this cold, sad feeling coming from the corner of the room. I grab my baby out of his crib, and we move him back into the living room. As soon as I do this, we still have the monitor recording. The orbs are still there. The next morning, I posted the videos on Facebook. One of my friends took the video into Photoshop and saw a man's face at the end of the crib. Later, he found 2 women and a toddler. He sent me these pictures via Messenger, and he commented on the post with them, but the quality of the pictures aren't too great. For the past couple of months, I've been working at a slaughterhouse and plant in northern Wyoming. Great place. Best job I've ever had. Sincerely. I love it here. When I started, I worked as a meat cutter, but I wasn't particularly good at it. I eventually ended up on a cleanup, a position in which I've rarely excelled. I was the daytime cleaner, and there was a nighttime cleaner who worked in the plant after everyone else went home. I don't want to use his real name. Let's call him Dorothy Zbornak. So Dorothy worked here for quite some time before I got here, and I assisted him with anything I could during the hours or shifts overlapping. Then, Dorothy started talking about quitting. He expressed a great deal of discontentment and a desire to work closer to home. He told me he'd probably be leaving at the end of the summer and asked me not to say anything. I obliged. It's not my business. Then, he randomly quit one Friday night, leaving the place untouched and a colossal mess. The plant manager called me in on Saturday and asked me to clean it up. He also gave me Dorothy's job. That's where things get unsettling. My new shift has me working alone in this place until at least midnight every day of the week. No problem, I like being alone. But then the ghosts that apparently haunt this place began to mess with me. It started as random noises and shadows moving in my peripheral vision. Not frequently, but enough that I took notice. I asked another employee about it yesterday afternoon. Let's call him Wilma Flintstone. I said to Wilma, "Have you ever noticed anything strange or paranormal around here?" "Early in the morning I have," they replied. "Before everyone else gets here. This place is a little lively." "I noticed that it's a little lively when I'm by myself too," I said. "Noises, shadows, voices." "Voices?" Wilma asked. "Yeah," I explained. "Voices in other rooms. Quiet whispering that I can't quite make out. There shouldn't be voices if I'm the only person in the building." "You're not crazy," Wilma said with a smile. "You're not the only one who's experienced things. Maybe someone died here or something. Like who? I don't know, Wilma said, then, with a laugh. We do kill a lot of animals here. I can't imagine the ghosts of 1,000 dead cows and pigs standing around in the packaging office have a verbal conversation, I told him. It got me thinking, though, and I told him as much. The area we inhabit used to be native land. I think Shoshone? Not sure. But it wouldn't be too far-fetched if our plant was built over some native burial ground or something, and we're actually working on top of 1,000 deceased skeletons. Native American spirits tend to get upset when you disturb their eternal slumber. Well, whatever these unseen beings are, whether they are natives or just a lot of really unhappy dead cows, I decided to have a conversation with them last night after everyone left. Okay, ghosties, here's the deal. I don't know what your endgame is. I don't know what you hope to accomplish. Are you trying to drive me away? Are you trying to spook me? I have no qualms with you, and I would prefer if we could find a way to coexist. I have a job to do, and the job pays my bills. I have no intention of leaving. You're apparently stuck here because... I looked around to emphasize the point. If it was me, this is the absolute last place I'd want to spend eternity. Well, I guess it beats the fiery pit, but not by much. So you can't leave, and I won't. So could you guys just give me some space? Could you not mess with me? I don't think being dead removes your ability to be reasonable, and I'd really appreciate it. This did not go as I expected. They messed with me even harder. They apparently didn't like being asked to socially distance. The shadows came more frequently, and there were at least 2 times when the shapes in my peripheral vision weren't shapes at all. They were people. When I jerked my head to look, they'd be gone. There was one point where I was going to dump a mop bucket and I heard what sounded like footsteps directly behind me, less than a foot away. I drove almost headfirst into the nearest room, slammed the door shut and locked it. I looked into the... like a lock on a door is going to keep a Casper the Salty Ghost out. I finished my work as fast as I could and then practically ran to my vehicle. I floored the accelerator and sped off like I was being chased. I'm not so sure they weren't chasing me. There was the briefest moment that I thought I saw someone in my passenger seat right before I pulled out. I don't know what to do. I'm actually afraid of these things. I can't go to my boss and ask him to move me off the nights because ghosts. I cannot and will not quit. I'm making too much money and my life has drastically improved and stabilized from what it was. I won't let them drive me away. But I'm scared, and I don't know if there's anything I can do to make it up. Maybe I ought not to have tried to reason with them. Maybe I should have acknowledged them at all. Either way, the damage is done, and I've angered something I don't really understand. Before I'm getting started, I don't really believe in ghosts. That's mostly because I've never seen concrete evidence for their existence, and because the thought of them creeps me out. But lately, I've been thinking that there might actually be a possibility that they are real. The house I'm currently living in is from my deceased grandparents, and it has a ground floor and a basement. It's in a really peaceful area, and I'm loving it here. However, the basement is creepy. I was around 10ish when I first stepped into the basement, and as most kids would be, I was scared. I avoided going down there, and when my mother asked me why, I told her something along the lines of, I think someone is down there. Typical behaviour for children. This fear never left me though. I'm now an adult, and this area of the house still gives me the chills. It's not the whole basement, just the one room, the gaming room of my siblings. The rest of the basement is not creepy at all, since we have lights with motion detectors everywhere. However, when I get near the room, my heart starts racing, almost as if I'm about to have an anxiety attack. I don't know why, it's confusing. Once I'm in the room, I start sweating and I feel as if someone is watching me. Sometimes I see shadows out of the corner of my eyes. It's just creepy. The door to that room, which I always close, has milky glass in it. I've noticed it multiple times that I saw silhouettes moving, which shouldn't be possible. My fitness room is next to the gaming room, and I'm able to see the motion triggered up lights go on whenever someone goes into the other room, through the little gap below the door. Often, when light goes on in the other room, I blame my family, thinking they might be there. But the light also went on when I knew for sure that no one was besides me was at home. This happened multiple times. Maybe the lights were broken? I already told you that I feel like someone is in that room, and for the longest time, I believed I was just crazy. Maybe some fears from my childhood stuck with me, or maybe it was just hysteria. The odd thing, my girlfriend also dislikes that room. When she first slept over at my place, we went into the basement to get some alcohol. She, however, stood in front of that room and wouldn't dare to go in there, and told me that she would wait for me. I didn't give it much thought and chalked up to her not liking basements in general. A few months ago, I told her that there is a room in the house which always causes me to panic, and within seconds she asked me, the room across the stairs, the gaming room? I asked her how she knew that it was that room, and she replied that she felt like something was in there, therefore she avoids that place. She also told me about seeing shadows out of the corner of her eyes. Mind you, I never talked to anyone about my feelings towards that specific room. It's been getting worse. I see the shadows more often, and I've been starting to notice some odd noises like rustling and something softly tapping on the door. It might just be my brain playing tricks on me and wanting to hear something spooky, but it's slowly driving me insane. I need to know what might cause this and how I can fight my irrational fear of that one room. I'm now really desperate and will be glad for any advice, because if it goes on like this, I'll never step foot in a basement again.
This actually happened just recently, in the past month. At my boyfriend's house, there's this doll. The doll is very old, plastic. It's got short brown hair. It's really creepy. Half of its face is melted into its shoulder, so the look of it gives off a really weird vibe. Not even the look, but being around it, the energy is off. It's pretty tall, maybe like 3 feet or so. I didn't really pay attention to it the first couple times I went over in the last month. My boyfriend's mom actually found the doll in a storage unit. She goes through storage units. They found this doll wrapped up in a bag and decided to take it home with them. When I first picked up the doll, I actually felt kind of scared, but comfortable at the same time with it. I'm a very spiritual person, so I know something was attached to the doll. When I had left their house, I get a call from my boyfriend telling me it was moving around the house and ending up in weird places. He decided to mess around with the doll and threw it down the stairs, to which its leg fell off. Out popped a brown piece of paper. The message written on it was worn off from old age. I went over there a week after and brought the doll upstairs with us, to which the dog was up there and started barking and growling at the doll. But I felt uncomfortable with it and didn't want to let go of it for some reason. I felt like something came over me and I was attached to the doll and whatever was attached to the doll. My boyfriend started asking me why I was acting weird and told me to stop and give him the doll. I don't remember how I was acting because it felt like something took over. I kept telling him that Amy will get mad and that she likes me. That's where the doll got its name from. My boyfriend finally took the doll from me and put it in the opposite room from him. Through his vent, you can see the room it was in. The next morning, we woke up and the doll was staring right into his room from the vent. I swore to never pick that doll up again because whatever was attached to it wasn't good. Ever since then, I've been having dreams about demons and the doll. So a few years ago, the night sky was clear and my mom and I had gotten off work at about the same time, around 2 or 3 a.m. The moon looked beautiful. We decided to go out and watch the sunrise over the lake. We lived about 15 minutes from Lake Michigan, and it's pretty regular for us to talk for hours. We took a back road through a wooded area to get to our usual location. Some info you need to know about the location in order to imagine this. The road we took was a very small road that had thick woods and swamp on both sides. The road is so small that if cars were going both ways, sometimes you have to pull off slightly to the side to let the other car pass. Lots of greenery surrounds this road, and there are slight dips on either side. No streetlights or anything, so the only illumination is the car's headlights. Okay, so we're driving and chatting, and I'm in passenger, Mum's driving. As she's talking to me, I'm looking at her and she's looking at the road. She stops mid-sentence, and I could tell that something was happening in front, so I glanced over. I said, "What's a kid doing out here this late?" I saw what I can only describe as a creature that looked like it was made to blend in with its surroundings, that was standing on the left side of the road. It seemed to be made of twigs and leaves and branches, almost, but not quite, resembling a tumbleweed. It stood at most 3 foot tall. It seemed to be covered in patches of some sort of orange or copper or red fur, but not quite fur. As soon as the words left my mouth, I realised that's not a kid. My mum shouted my thoughts and slammed on the brakes. If you've ever seen TV shows depicting the way vampires move, like super fast, almost glitching across, that's how this thing moved to get in front of us. It was on the left, then right in front of us in a split second. If I had to guess, we were maybe 7 feet away from it. It lifted its head. Its whole body was kind of one big mass, and it looked at us with its eye. Yeah, one eye. One completely black eye. We sat there in stunned silence for a moment. Just as I was asking, "What is that?" it got down and slithered, like a fucking snake, past the car and into the brush on my side. My mom took off at full speed. I'd researched a lot about how one person's thoughts and recollection of a situation can influence another person's until the story is no longer the same. There was even a study done about people who had never been on a hot air balloon, being shown a picture of one, being told that they were on it when the photo was taken, and asked to remember the day. Most people said that they remember it and make up a story about it. Really interesting stuff, absolutely worth looking into. So both of us knowing this prior to the event, I asked her what she saw, and she asked me what I saw. Both were the same. At first we tried to rationalise it as a tumbleweed, but no, it surely looked at us. Maybe a deformed animal, but no animal around here looks like tumbleweed. Maybe a really skinny deformed fox? Couldn't be, because the way it glitched across the road, it's the only way I know how to describe it. We then moved on to more paranormal creatures in our search engines. This proved fruitless, as nothing we could find matched the description of what we saw. When telling this story to friends, I often find myself referring to it as a realistic and nightmarish version of the Lorax. To this day, when recalling this incident, it feels like we saw something we weren't supposed to. Like we saw past what we all know as fact and real and tangible, and saw a part of what this world really is. The feeling doesn't make sense, and neither does this story. If anyone has any suggestions about what this could be, I'm open to answer any and all questions. I just want to know what we experienced, even if it's just an animal we never knew of. My son was 2 years old when all of this started. I was sitting in the living room on the couch watching my son play with his ball, and it rolled into the dining room. I looked at him and told him to go get it, and he started crying and said no, that there was a man in the dining room that was going to get him. As you could imagine, I jumped off the couch and ran to the dining room. There was no one there. Yet my son was crying, saying he was standing in the corner. I told him there was no man in the dining room. I grabbed his ball and we went back to the living room. I had forgotten all about that encounter until he was around 3 years old, and my twin sister and our friend were at my house. Our friend kept bugging my son, wanting to play hide and seek. She told him she was going to hide in our basement so that he couldn't find her. All of a sudden, in a different voice than he usually talked in, he pointed us at the basement door and told my friend, if she goes downstairs, the girl down there will kill her. I was shocked, for one because he had told her in a deep growling voice instead of his sweet baby voice. So I asked him who he was talking about, and he told me her name was Sarah. Then he went on to explain that Sarah was dead. I asked, how did she die? He then told me that she had died in a car wreck at the age of 16. She had been with her parents, they'd hit a tree, and then the car had went through a house. I couldn't believe what he just told us. A couple of days later, we went to eat at a Mexican restaurant. We went to the restroom before we left the restaurant. My son then told my twin sister not to go in the bathroom stall next to the one we were in, because Sarah was using that bathroom. My friend jokingly said, well, how did Sarah get there? My son told us she sat in between me and you in the back seats on the way up here. I thought maybe he just had a good imagination at his age. So a couple of months later, he grabbed my hand and told me, Mommy, come here, your friend wants to say hi to you. I went into his bedroom holding his hand. I asked, "Where is he?" My son points and says, "He's standing right there, Mummy." Then my son tells me, "Jamie says to tell you not to be sad anymore." I asked him where he'd heard that from. My son says he is standing right there. That's what he told me to tell you. Jamie was my ex-boyfriend. We had dated in middle school and then again in high school. In high school, he'd been in a car wreck and had passed away. A couple of weeks later, we were going through old photo albums. My son points to a picture and says, "I know that man." I asked, "How do you know him?" My son said he comes and talks to me. I then explained that the man couldn't talk to him because of a picture of my father-in-law and he had passed away before me and his dad had gotten together. My son says, "Mom, I do talk to him. He told me about taking Daddy for rides in his old Ford truck when Daddy was little." I asked my husband about it and he confirmed that his dad had an old Ford truck and they used to go riding in it. Then me and my husband were sitting in the living room a couple of weeks later and we hear our son laughing and talking to someone. We both get up and walk into his room. I asked, "Who are you laughing at?" He turns to us and says, "I'm playing with Mama." My husband's mother had passed away when our son was 2 years old. I asked him what she was saying to him. He then threw his hand up and said, "Hey," his name. That was exactly what she used to do every time he walked in the room before she passed away. My husband had to be at work at 5 a.m. every morning, so I would always get up, make him breakfast, and make his lunch to take to work with him. He leaves for work, I'm sitting in the living room, and I see something in our bedroom. I get up to see what it is, and I see 2 girls standing in the mirror brushing their hair. I'm thinking, I'm just seeing things. So I rub my eyes, and nope, they're still standing there. After they notice that I'm looking at, they disappear. I ask my son what they wanted. He tells me that Sarah came for him and that she isn't leaving until she gets him. I was so scared after he told me that. The scary part is, my son was a healthy kid for the longest time. Then all of a sudden he started having stomach problems. The doctors have done all kinds of tests and can't find a reason for why he's sick. He's now 14 years old, and when he was 11, he started having seizures. Of course, doctors had done tests and couldn't figure out what was causing him to have seizures. They told us that usually one side of the brain triggers a seizure. Both, but sides of his brain show activity for the seizures. That being said, we moved out of the home we had been living in, and he got better. So I don't know if it was the house causing his illness, or whatever was in that house. Now we've moved back into the house we used to live in, and his stomach problems have come back. Me and my husband had split up for about 8 months. That's the reason we'd moved out of the house, and then moved back in. Strange things are happening again. For starters, my son's stomach problems have come back, and it seems to be worse now than the first time he had unexplained stomach problems. But anyways, we've been hearing strange things in the house. I'll be laying in bed at night and hear a man laughing. I will wake my son and husband up, and the laughter stops. Then me and my husband, neither of us smoke, and in certain parts of our house you can smell cigarette smoke really bad, as if someone is smoking right at that moment. And we have started to hear noises coming from our basement, and I'm sure I'm not going down there to see what the heck it is. Then last night we were getting ready for bed, and I was standing in my son's room. If you've read the first post, you know we have a door that is connected to our son's room, so that we can keep an eye on him because of the strange things that have happened. And my husband was standing in our room, and I asked him if he just saw our bed move, like someone had sat down on it and moved a little bit. He said yes, and started to look under the cover to make sure neither of our dogs had snuck under the cover while we weren't looking. But there were no dogs in the bed. I woke up twice last night to a man's laughing. It's 5:10 in the morning as I'm writing this. My husband has left for work and I'm wide awake because I'm scared to go back to bed. If anyone knows of any ways to help, please let me know. I was asking some of my family members what they had experienced in our house. My stepdaughter's experience. My stepdaughter lived with us from the ages 17 to 18, and she stayed in the room that our son stays in now. She told me one night she went to use the bathroom and shower, and she had a conversation with a woman that she thought was me. The door was shut, so she thought I was sitting on her bed talking to her, because whatever it was mimicked my voice, and she had a 20-minute conversation with whatever it was. Now, I remember this happening because me and my husband, her father, were in the living room with our son watching TV. I remember her coming in the living room and telling me it was rude to just walk off in the middle of our conversation. And me and my husband told her I hadn't got up on the couch at all since she went to her room. My husband's experience. This one happened when our son was around 3 to 4 years old. I had wrecked my car, so my mother had come and got me and my little boy. My husband had come home from work and he knew he was with my mother, but he came in and saw a woman that looked like me walk into our bedroom. He had a 3 or 4 minute conversation with her. He was in the living room. He lays his paperwork from work on a table in the living room, goes into our bedroom, and the woman he was talking to was gone. He goes back into the living room to call me, and the paperwork he had laid down was ripped into pieces. My older sister's experience. Her ex has custody of their daughter, and they live in Ohio. We live in Tennessee. He brought my niece down for the summer to let her stay at our house. My sister stayed here while she was here, and they stayed in our son's bedroom. My sister said she woke up to an eerie feeling and looked in the corner of the room, and the little girl that my son called Little Sarah, because she didn't know her name, was sitting in the corner squatting with her elbows on her knees and her hands propping up her face, just looking at my sister. My sister threw the covers over her head and started praying and said it felt like an eternity, but she peeked out of the covers and the little girl was gone. So she sat up in the bed to go to the bathroom. We have connecting doors from our rooms to our son's. She looked in the room where me and my son were sleeping. My husband worked night shift at the time. And the little girl was in the corner of our room squatting. Needless to say, she never went to the bathroom that night. She lay back down, threw the covers over her head, and didn't come out till daylight. Now this happened tonight. It's 4:45 a.m. and my son woke me up around 12. Something and said, "Mom, was that you just whispering to me?" I told him, "I've been asleep. I haven't whispered anything." When my husband gets up for work at 4 a.m., he has to be work at 5 a.m. My husband and my son both watched me pick my son's AirPods up off the floor and put them in his AirPod case. Our son lays back down till 4:25 and something wakes him up. And my son came in the living room and says, "Mom, where is my other AirPod? I watched you put both of them on my case." And we went in his bedroom to look, and it was laying on the floor and none of us had touched them since I stuck them back in their case when I woke up at 4 a.m. I never really grew up definitively believing in the paranormal, although I had a few strange encounters as a child. Waking up to the featureless grey figure in my doorway, for example, as well as what seemed to be an apparition of a man in a white robe walking on the beach at night while I gazed out of our condo room while on vacation, only to call my parents to come look, and he was gone not a moment later. Most were just explained as my eyes playing tricks on me, which I accepted. In college, in my dorm room, with a few friends just a room away, I heard a woman's voice whisper my name from the wall I was standing next to. It was well known a woman had been murdered in the building in the 80s, and many people had stories of encounters, but since no one else heard the voice, I chalked it up to being drunk. It wasn't up until a few years ago, I'm 28, that I didn't have an excuse for what I experienced. At the time, I was a waitress at a bar restaurant type spot. The first day I started, the woman who trained me warned the place was haunted by 3 spirits: an old man, a boy, and a woman. I listened politely as she explained the little boy followed her home and made quick friends with her young daughter, but I had serious doubts. Months later, I was in my room, getting ready to go out for the night, listening to music from my phone as my friend lounged on my bed. I had called off work that night, feeling like I needed a bit of a break. The carpet in my room is thick shag carpet, and you can bet that when you open and close the door to my room, it takes effort as there's no space between the two. As the music played low, I heard the creak of the door and whipped around, not expecting my parents to be home yet. My dog lay clueless and asleep at my feet, and no windows were open for a cross breeze. I looked at my friend on my bed, who was alert and no longer lost in her phone. I asked, "Did my door move?" It was completely still by the time I had turned around. "I think so," she replied, obviously not wanting to believe her own words. Okay, well, let's ignore that. 10 minutes later, I finished getting ready, and get up to leave my room to go feed my dog before we leave. At this point, I turned off the music. Walking through the doorway, it felt like my lungs froze as I exhaled and immediately felt off. At that moment, from my left, a voice from the dark, empty bathroom beside me spoke. The voice was that of a woman and was muffled, to the point that I could only make out the last word, you. I still felt the breath caught in my throat as I turned around to see my friend in my room on my bed with a horrified look on her face. "Did you say something?" I asked her, praying she would say yes. "No, I thought you did." Needless to say, I grabbed my dog and we ran out of the house. When I brought this up at work, the owner who lived above the bar and who had been out of town mentioned how it had been quiet and not busy with the usual paranormal activity since she returned. "So that's where Rebecca went," she mused. That night, I politely asked Rebecca to go home and haven't heard her since, but still don't know what she said to me.
From the outside, it seems to be some average, nondescript house. The kind of place that you'd likely find in any city or small town. It's not, though. This house is like something out of the Twilight Zone or a Stephen King novel. You see, I lived in this house when I was 11 or 12 years old. That was 93, 94. My room was the one above the porch with the double window. My sister's room was across the hall. My mother and my brothers lived downstairs. During the time we lived there, strange things occurred. Some of them you may find hard to believe, and that's okay. I can only assure you that they actually happened. Some 26 years after the fact, I can provide you no evidence and my only solemn word that everything I'm about to tell you is the absolute truth. For starters, sometimes our clocks would run backwards for no discernible reason. We changed the batteries and checked them for defects, but nothing seemed to be amiss. They just randomly started running in reverse from time to time. There was also an issue with our basements. How do I describe this? I guess the best way would be to say the basement seems to be on a portal to hell. We would hear strange noises coming from down there that wouldn't be explained away as creaking pipes or the house setting on the foundation. Things like demonic growling, roaring. When someone had to go down there to do laundry, there was a sound like someone whispering, and the whole area had an unsettling feel to it. We had this dog, a German Shepherd named Lassie. She was an exceptionally brave, loyal, and protective dog, but she would not go near the basement or the basement door. Eventually, she became so terrified that she ran away and never came back. There was also a night when we all woke up to find a big black crow, or raven, I'm not sure, in the house, flying madly around. This is in the ungodly hours of the morning, mind you, so no one would have been up to open the door or window to let it in. If you can even imagine an intelligent bird like a crow or raven willingly flying through an opening into a human dwelling like some kind of idiotic sparrow. There were no holes in the roof and no place for it to get out. Where did it come from and where did it go? I have no memory of us actually getting the bird out of the house, but I never saw it again. Then there was the man. At the back of the house there was a hallway that led off the dining room and past the kitchen towards the lower floor bedrooms. The twins, mere toddlers at the time, had their nursery in the foremost room on the left. They would sit back there and have conversations with someone that none of us could see. They referred to this person as simply the man. The man seemed to enjoy keeping the boys company, but he was anything but benign. One day, while the rest of us were at school, my mum had the twins in their high chairs, feeding them lunch. When she stepped away to do something, get something from the kitchen or answer the phone, don't remember, there was a crash and the sound of screaming. One of the twins that was on the floor was highly tipped over. He'd bashed his head really bad. The high chairs had been secured on the footing before she started. When she asked the other twin what happened, he replied, "The man did it." My little brother ended up in the hospital in a coma for a long time. You might be happy to know that he survived and today is married with 2 beautiful daughters. But CPS didn't believe that my mother was innocent and began to stalk us. They would park across the street from our house and watch us. They would drop in unexpectedly. They were looking for a reason to take us and put us in the foster care. This is how we ultimately ended up leaving the house. Rather than deal with any more tragedy or weirdness or stalking, we packed up what we could and moved across the country. What we couldn't take with us, we left behind. I asked my mother once, about 5 years before she died, if she'd ever actually seen the entity that the boys referred to as the man. She said she had, but only once. She said she was walking past the kitchen door one day and had caught sight of someone in her peripheral vision. A tall man wearing dark clothes, standing with pink hair to the side, staring out of the kitchen window. When she turned to get a better look, he was gone. That house scared the crap out of all of us. There was always a feeling like we were being watched. Thankfully, it's many years and many miles behind us. When we left, there was no one to pay the mortgage, so the bank took repossession. Because of this, today it's privately owned by people I don't even know. For that reason, I will not disclose the location. I won't even tell you what state it's in. If you've ever been unfortunate enough to stumble upon it, however, I advise you to keep walking. Don't stop to look back, because if you stop to look at a picture, there's something likely that will happen to you taking a knee.
A few years ago, me and my old man moved into a condo. Nothing spectacular, just a bigger place for our expanding family. We went through a rutch patch and split up, but we still lived together. I know, not everyone agrees, but whatever. We worked opposite one another, and I slept on the fold-out couch for a while. I began to notice a lot of noises coming from the kitchen at night. Typically, it would start at around 11 or 12, and it was harmless at first. I told him about the noises, but he brushed them off. A few nights later, they started to get more intense. I could hear dishes being moved around and clinking on each other. Then I started to hear the drawers and cabinet open slightly and close. I was able to get a recording of the sounds. The couch was located right across the hall, in front of the kitchen door, so it was a decent enough recording. I showed the recording to him, and it made him second guess what I said. So one night, he sat out with me and just listened, and sure enough, it started. And it was very loud, and you could tell it was movement in the kitchen, as if it was in use. We sort of just laughed it off for a while, even after the fridge door opened up one night. We would joke and call it our friendly ghost, ask what it was cooking, just being silly and stupid. After working on our issues, we both got back together, and things were fine. For a bit. We didn't even notice the noises as much. A few months ago, out of nowhere, things started to get rough. Not bad, but definitely not fun to deal with. Pictures started coming off our walls at random, even breaking some of the glass ones. Books would get moved off shelves. Most of it we could see or hear. Then things started to move and fall off of our desk. Most recently, it's been quiet again, which is nice, but I just don't like dealing with this. We're looking to move, but it's an expensive area here. Me and my old man have been taking the advice to stop acknowledging and engaging in the ghost's activities. We've been pretending not to notice or rationalize it as something else. The issue is, our kids now think we are playing a game with them, so they're more hyper-aware now and drawing attention to everything that happens. The more we ignore it, the more they think we're joking and they acknowledge it. They're kids, so I don't want to get upset with them for thinking this. But I'm not sure how to be serious enough with them to explain that mommy and daddy are not making these things happen as a joke. Last night was family movie night. We were watching the new Croods movie since my kids haven't seen it and they loved the first. The entire time we were watching it, we had Xbox controllers flying off our desks, water bottles being knocked off tables. It's becoming hard for us to ignore while the kids laugh about it jokingly, saying, "Oh, it's just our ghost friend." And it's so uneasy to hear them say that. I told my Elsie about all this and she suggested that she come stays with me again. and smudge the place. We are indigenous. Since I never learned how to properly use my white sage. I don't want her to take away from her life just to travel over here for this, but I guess she can sense how stressed it's making me. I'm at a loss. It's been going on for 4 years now. My family and I have always been animal lovers. I've never known a time when we didn't have cats or dogs with us, and I feel like they've helped raise me. When my father was in college, he adopted 2 cats named Tigger and Cedo. Tigger passed away due to coyote, and after she passed, Cedo was never the same. She was grumpy and preferred to be by herself, but I would annoy her with my love anyway. One night, I was carrying her in a wicker basket with some blankets. I would bring her room to room with me as I cleaned up. I'd been petting her and listening to her purr when she suddenly stopped moving. I was maybe 12, and I remember praying for the first time to bring her back to me. It was awful to bring her out to my mom and tell her she had passed. I had a tradition, whenever a pet died, that I would make a concrete headstone with little marbles and their names on them. I had set it on our kitchen counter to dry and left it there. The next morning, I checked on it and found a small piece of her fur right in the center. I went around to everyone and asked if they had placed it there. They all said they hadn't. It felt like she was giving me one last piece of her. I kept it in a tiny knick-knack tea kettle I had, and it lives in there with a few other whiskers I had found weeks following her passing. When I was younger, I had that first encounter at our first house. It was the night that my mom was changing my window blinds and got them to the store, and since they had to repair something, I had to spend one night without blinds, which wasn't too bad. Anyway, I always had a pain falling asleep, so about 1.5 hours in my bed trying to fall asleep with the moon shining up my room. At one point, I felt really weird. Felt like something wasn't right. You know that feeling when you walk somewhere and you feel like someone is watching you? You turn around and you make eye contact with someone? It was just the same. I tried to fight it since I wanted to fall asleep, since it had been a bit I was in bed already. But curiosity took control. I opened my eyes and saw it. Suspended, head down on the right top side of my window, was that big black shadow staring at me. So deep that I could see the sky beside it, not even a single reflective light would shine through. As I started panicking, I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I was paralyzed. Only my eyes could move anymore. It took a few seconds and it left. But it took me a while to actually unparalyzed. It was actually the next morning that I realized that I stayed like that until I was out of energy and fell asleep. For years, I kept that story to myself. Until my sister came to me 6 weeks ago and around a cup of coffee told me a story where she had encountered it as well in her room, but the shadow was beside her bed. And the story is practically the same. We moved to that house when I was younger, and since day one, weird things were happening. We had a mountain dog, and in our old house, she would literally spend her whole winter days sleeping outside in the snow. She liked so much the cold, you guessed it, she would always spend the summers lying on the basement's ceramic to cool down. But not in this house. On the first night, I already could feel that something was going on. My dog was always sleeping in my bed. I went ahead the first night and closed the light. About 4 minutes into complete darkness, my dog on my left side and my room door on my right, I saw my dog raising her head and staring in the long, dark corridor. She stared for about 9 seconds before she started crying and kind of panicking. I freaked out, opened the lights, nothing was there. I went back to bed. The dog lay down beside me again. 10 minutes later, just the same. But now she's growling. I opened the light. She jumped out of the bed and ran into my parents' room. She never went into the basement since, and every time she would come would be during the day because I would kind of force her in my room with food. She would take it, look nervously around her, and run back upstairs with her tail in her arse, even during crazy hot weather. When playing on my computer at night once, my computer mouse flew from my desk to my face at about a 45-degree angle up, which is impossible to have accidentally happened. There's even a night where we threw a party, and as we all went to sleep at the end of the evening in a deep, dark basement, we were still talking in bed until we fell asleep, sleeping like 6 to 8 or 9 people in each room. Anyway, about 7 people in the room beside mine saw my friend that we were hearing talking to our other friend outside in a tent at the same moment, open their door abruptly, burst into their room, open the light, said some bullshit, and closed the light and slapped the door. Well, at least, so they say. One of the girls in the room came into our room, opened our light, and asked what the fuck. And this is where the story gets weird. My friend never stepped foot in the house. He was outside the whole time. Neither did he open the light, since it was pitch black and about 15 people would have seen it. But on the other side, there are 7 that all got woke up by the same thing. Our friend busting into their room and opening the light. Sometimes at night, I would hear the ground crack, as if someone would be walking towards my room from the end of the corridor, and it would stop right at my door. Lots of other little things happened, but the only attack incident we've had so far was the mouse in the face. I've been sitting on this for 4 years. I know because it happened when my daughter was a newborn. She was a few months old. Let me start with, I'm a skeptical person. I believe sometimes our minds prime us when we hear a scary story, and then shortly after we see or experience a scary story. Now, I also believe in paranormal. So it was a Sunday, and my spouse and I decided, after putting our daughter to bed, we would spend some time together and play Minecraft. And so we did just that. Our daughter to bed and play Minecraft together, during which our daughter awakes in need of food. My wife goes to take care of her, and I had the strangest, creepiest feeling I ever experienced. Like some other presence was there. It was so strong that I paused the game. My wife is not a fan of even the zombie sounds on Minecraft, such when we play it, it's in peaceful mode, no zombies, skeletons, or other mobs. So I note said feeling, but brushed it aside. Skeptic in me, my imagination, etc. I thought about asking my spouse when she came back, but again, I brushed it aside. And just as I pushed the idea out, she asks, "You noticed anything strange while I was gone?" So I said, "Strange how? Creepy?" I proceeded to tell her my experience of the strange feeling, and she says while she was tending to our daughter, she saw what she thought were shadows moving. Well, we stopped what we were doing and brought our daughter into our room and went to bed. My spouse works as a CNA at nursing homes and care facilities quite a bit, and she's had her own scary experiences, such she doesn't let horror movies or anything deemed scary play in our house. Okay, so this experience was actually my mom's. When I was 9, about 24 years ago, my mom's older sister passed away very unexpectedly. She was only 35. It was just a very tragic situation. Anyways, my grandparents, mom, and other aunts were devastated, and I remember it just being a very sad time. So fast forward to about a month to 6 weeks after her passing, we just moved into a new house, and all of this was going on while we were waiting on an autopsy report, cause of death, etc. So one night, my mom woke from a dead sleep and felt compelled to go down to the kitchen. As she turned the light on, to her absolute shock, There sat my Aunt Veronica on the bar stool at the kitchen counter. Mom said she looked just as she did in life, not ghostly or transparent or whatever. She told my mom she knew everyone was worried, and she apologized for how she left, but she said she had to go. She told my mom she was at peace and her passing was all for the best. Mom said she looked so peaceful and happy. She told Mom she was going to wake up and not believe this happened, so she was going to give her proof. She said she would be receiving a check for a large amount that we weren't expecting, and when she got that check, Mom would know that what happened was real and not a dream. Well, lo and behold, the next day, thinking that was all a dream, Mom ventured out to the mailbox and inside was a tax credit check for a large amount, and in that moment, she burst into tears. She unequivocally knew that what had happened the night before was real. This isn't the only time she has visited us since she passed. She comes to me in dreams every now and then. I actually keep her Bible on my nightstand, and every time I dream of her, I write it down on a piece of notebook paper folded up inside. I know that she is really visiting me. It's not just a dream. Like I said, the circumstances surrounding her death were very tragic. I will mention that our entire family was under the impression that she had died of a heart attack. She did have a pre-existing heart condition. But it wasn't until my granddad passed away in 2020 that we saw the actual autopsy report. My aunt actually committed suicide by taking 30 prescription pills at one time. This is something my grandparents carried with them all those years, and never revealed that to my mom, her sister, or anyone else. I think the actual cause of her death is the reason why she visits so often. I assume there is a lot of guilt she has about how she chose to go about her death. Either way, my aunt was the most wonderful person. She never had kids or a husband. We honestly talk about and think about her every day, even all these years later. This is one of just many memorable encounters with her following her death. And since my grandmother and grandfather have passed, they accompany her now in our dreams. When I was around 6 years old, I saw something very, very scary that sometimes even gave me chills to this day. I was in a room with my grandma and asked her where was a toy bear that I liked. She said it was in her room and the lights were out. When I was about to turn them on, I saw it. It was right in the corner. A boy, a little bit taller than me. He had shorts and no shirt, relatively skinny and short hair. What was even weirder than that? He was emanating some kind of smoke, a dark smoke or something. I felt like something was very wrong and he started to walk towards me while I froze. I could see his eyes, but that's about it. No expression because his body was almost entirely darkness. Then I feel someone behind me. It was my grandma with a shocked look on her face. She turned the lights on and he disappeared, but some traces of smoke flew out of the window. What scared me the most on this was the reaction from my grandma. She was scared shitless and drove me to some kind of church or spiritism center. It's called something like this in Brazil. I guess it was to make sure that doesn't happen again. It worked, but still. Her room gives me creeps to this day. I have a pretty interesting story that's given me chills the few times I've heard it. So obviously, this didn't happen to me, but to a co-worker friend while we both worked at a nursing home. I 100% believe this happened because this person is very level-headed, and I haven't known her to lie or make things up in all the years I knew and worked with her. This happened very late at night in a nursing home when she had gone into a patient's room to give some medication. She said she didn't make it further than the doorway because she saw the patient was sitting up in bed, talking to something that obviously wasn't human, who was sitting on the end of her bed. She described it as a completely black cloaked figure. When she got to the doorway, the patient and the figure both looked over to her, and she couldn't make out any facial features, except for a very large and exaggerated smile. She promptly pooped her pants and ran to the nurse's station to grab another nurse to go back with her. When she got to the room, the patient was still sitting up but alone and said something to the effect of, "You scared my friend. He's hiding in the closet." She didn't look in the closet. She thinks this may have been something like the angel of death, because the patient was going downhill and ended up passing a few weeks after that. She may have given more detail, but this is all I remember now, because this happened some years ago. So I don't really know how to start these things. So I'll start by saying my family has always been sensitive to the paranormal or supernatural, etc. I'll begin with when I was about 8 years old and my brother was 9. We had the day off of school. My mum popped to the shops literally 5 minutes down the road. We were upstairs just talking and annoying each other, as siblings do. All of a sudden, we heard this big hearty laugh followed by, "Hello?" coming from downstairs. We were home alone. We looked at each other shocked at what we just heard. My brother and I looked down the stairs and yelled out to Mum. No response. Anyways, after we confirmed we were still home alone, I said, "That was strange." My brother confirmed. Then after that, we heard running water. We checked the bathroom, downstairs. No taps were running or leaking. So when Mum got home, we told her what had happened, and she just sort of shrugged it off because she's experienced stuff like that all the time. She just told us not to be afraid. Now, there were bumps in the night and shadowy figures spotted all the time. I'd seen the ghost of my cat after he was struck by a car. All of that didn't bother me too much. But one day, my brother, our friend and myself decided to go bushwalking at the end of our cul-de-sac. We took sticks and stuff to protect us from snakes. We live in Australia. And whatever we might come across. Nothing we had would have protected me from what I saw that day. We were walking through the bush, whacking the weeds and whatnot, having so much fun. Then we came to a stop at this fairly large pond, and I decided to stay there while my brother and friend went further. I was just looking out in the middle of the pond and thought to myself, it looks like there might have been a bridge going across at one point. At this time, I was feeling pretty calm and happy. I could hear my brother and friend talking and laughing in the distance. Just staring out at the water, then this very uneasy feeling came over me, and I went to call out to my brother and friend, but before I could make a sound, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a hooded figure. Its face was bone on one side and rotting flesh on the other. I felt fear wash over me. When I went to yell out to my brother and friend, I heard a splash. I looked down and the water was calm, like nothing had happened. I immediately screamed for my brother and friend, and they came running to me and asked me what happened. I told them I need to get out of here, so they took me back home. I don't know what that thing was, but it scared the living shit out of me. So a couple of months ago, I was putting my son to sleep. Same boring routine. Teeth brushed, hair brushed, bottle with a story, and then rock him to sleep. My partner and I take turns, so this night it was my turn. So we'd done our nightly routine, and I was rocking him to sleep. Had music playing and singing to him. He had his head resting on my shoulder, and was just laying there enjoying my horrible singing. Then he raises his head and looks behind me, behind the rocking chair. Then he changes sides and looks down behind the rocking chair. He does this a couple of more times, and I thought to myself, something must have caught his eye. I told him to stop being silly and to lay back down. As he lay his head back down, I felt a cool breath on the back of my neck. My son then lifted his head and laughed while looking behind me. I got up and looked for any rational explanation, but I couldn't find one. There was nothing. I tell this story because tonight something similar happened to my partner, and he's a skeptic when it comes to ghosts and whatnot. We had done the normal bedtime routine, nothing out of the ordinary. So my partner read our son a story while he had his bottle. Then my partner was rocking him while singing. He could have sworn he heard a childish giggle come from behind him. He, being the skeptic he is, ignored it and continued to rock our son. A few minutes later, he hears it again, and our son responded by laughing. Then he heard once more before he put our son down his cot. He came out and told me what happened, freaked out. I checked our baby monitor, and there's been orbs floating around. I know some people don't believe in orbs, but I wholeheartedly believe they are spirit's energy. Also, my brother lives with us, and he's up at night, and hears our son talking to himself. He's only a year old, so it's more baby babbling than anything else, but yeah, I believe children can see what we cannot. My parents had bought me a rescue horse. I named him Handsome because he was a very handsome horse. He was left in a field with no grass and only thistles to eat, so he was fairly skinny. I automatically fell in love with him. I only had him for 6 months because he sadly had to be put down because he had a brain tumour that made him stumble and confused. But I thought to myself, at least he had a good 6 months. The vet who put him down got his friend to bury Handsome on the property free of charge. I was so thankful that I got to know Handsome. He had a beautiful soul, even after being mistreated. Anyways, that afternoon, my mum went out to feed the other horse and our pony. She couldn't find them, so she walked down the hill and around the side where Handsome was buried. There was our horse and pony with their heads bowed down towards the grave. 3 of our next door neighbours' horses broke through our fence and were also there, heads bowed. It's like they were having their own little funeral for him. That night, I was sitting in the lounge and looked out the window. There was our other horse in the stable, and the pony was standing just outside. But there was a third horse. I got up and looked out the window, thinking it was one of the neighbours again. But then it started walking towards the window and up beside the house. I went out to the side door to get a closer look, but it was gone. I felt an overwhelming sense of warmth and started crying. I thought to myself, Handsome came to say goodbye one last time. Anyways, a few years ago, I was chilling at home. It was late at night. I think I was about 17 or 18 at the time. My parents and brother were asleep and my phone started ringing. It was one of my aunties from England calling on Facebook Messenger. I quickly thought to myself, oh no, this can't be good. My nanny Jean, my mum's mum, must have passed. I answered the call and said, hi auntie, what's up? All I hear is sobbing on the phone. She's trying to talk, but she was so choked up. I asked, did Nanny Jean pass? She replied no. A few seconds passed and she continued, it's Uncle Glenn, sweetheart. He passed away in his sleep. My heart dropped. My throat closed up. I was speechless. I started crying and I went to wake up my dad to let him know what had happened. My Uncle Glenn was my mum's brother and they were super close, so I didn't want to let my mum know just yet. Thought we would tell her in the morning. My dad had a conversation with my auntie and then a little while later he hung up and comforted me and told me to try and get some sleep. I went to my room and cried myself to sleep. A few hours went past and I woke up. What I thought was my mom or dad sitting on my bed. I felt a warm hand on my cheek, followed by a stroke of my hair. I opened my eyes to see no one in my room. I sat up quickly, confused, thinking I was sure of what I felt. I honestly think it was my uncle coming to say his goodbyes and to let me know he was okay. So you know how they always tell you that little kids can see spirits more than adults can? Well, this morning I was putting laundry away in my 1-year-old's closet with the door swung open, blocking my view of his window and wall. I could, however, look through the crack where the door hinge was and see his window, and if I put my face right up to the door hinge, I could see a good space in front of his window as well. You know, perspective. Anyway, I'm putting away the laundry, and for about a minute and a half, I hear him just giggling and going ham. I look through the door hinge and see his window, and see the curtain move like someone is pulling it around themselves. I put my face closer to the hinge to see better, and see that my 1-year-old is about a foot away from his window, laughing and staring right out the curtain. I watched for about 5 more seconds, and saw the curtain move again, like it was being pulled around someone with the intent of hiding them. Then I watched my 1-year-old walk up to the curtain. I looked away to hang up laundry again, and didn't even think anything of it because I assumed my 5-year-old was playing hide and seek with his brother. They do it all the time. Well, I finish with the laundry and walk out of the room, and turn off the lights and call my sons by name to follow me out of the room. I walk into my entryway where I can see my living room because I'm headed back to the laundry room. My 5-year-old is laying on the couch, watching TV. There's no way he could have gone to the living room without me seeing him, which means he's been there the whole time. Was my son playing with his spirit? Or was I just imagining seeing the curtain move? I think it's important to note that I do have a very small fan in my son's room going 24/7, but it's not large enough to cause the curtain to move. It's a heavy blackout curtain, and a gust of air wouldn't cause the curtain to wrap around like someone was hiding in it. Also, important to note, in my opinion, is we live in a fairly new build and no one has ever passed away in, around, or on my property. So it was probably around 9 or 10, and my family was moving back to our hometown area from El Paso, where my dad was stationed on a base there. Our realtor, M, was showing us houses and decided upon showing us a house when it was just getting dark outside. So we pull up, and it's overgrown with bushes and ugly crabgrass. The sidewalk is uneven and jagged, even missing in some places. The white siding is pretty much brown by this point, with tree branches overhanging almost every inch of the roof, so all you can see is this cave-like entrance into the front door. M informs us, oh yeah, it's been on the market for years, and there's no electricity, so we will be seeing it in the dark. We go inside, and the sight that hits us is remarkably depressing. There's broken picture frames and glass all over the floor. Red splotches of some sort of powder are covering everything. A very, very large chest is in the center of the living room, about 5 feet in the front of the front door. And there is the room's one single intact photo frame, with a half-ripped picture of a family inside of it, a boy and his mom. Sitting on top of it in almost perfect condition, except one crack in the glass. The house smells like something old and wet, yet fresh and rotting at the same time. No one noticed the smell but me. Now, me being the scaredy cat I am, I was ready to skedaddle. My parents didn't want to be rude to M, so we continued to see the house. We move into the hallway of the living room, and the attic door with the ladder going up to it is down and wide open, like a mouth with a staircase leading to it. My dad shuts the attic and decides we should take a look at the garage. The door into the garage is directly in front of us, off the hallway. We open the door, and this is where shit gets real. Now, y'all remember when M told us there was no electricity and we would be seeing the house in the dark, right? The singular light bulb in the garage was glowing blue. Not a bright iridescent blue by any means, but a sickly dim blue that was just bright enough to illuminate the walls and floor. My parents and M both made a comment how that was weird and what could cause that. Oh, I really don't know, huh? Strange. I couldn't care less because what I was staring at was worse than any creepy light that was working when it shouldn't have been. There was something inside the garage. It looked like a human, or maybe what used to be a human, but it appeared wet. Its skin kind of looked like if you grabbed it, it would just slip right off. I could see veins through the skin, which was so pale it seemed almost see-through. This thing was emaciated. I could see all its ribs, I could see hip bones. Its arms and legs consisted of just enough fat in the thighs and upper arms that you could tell that they were not just sticks slapped on a lump of flesh. The neck was just long enough to appear proportionally weird, and the head was turned to look straight at me. If you could even say it was looking, because where normal eyes would be, there were just holes. I don't remember a mouth. There were stringy clumps of hair and hanging from the tops and sides of its head, and I got the sick sense that it was happy to see me, almost as if it was thinking, finally. I watched this thing crawl on all fours, think hands and very long feet, not hands and knees, from the centre of the garage directly under the light bulb, cross in front of me and my family and Em, and disappear into the wall. It kept its head turned on me the whole time, and I followed it with my eyes the whole time. I don't remember even feeling scared in the traditional sense, like, oh shit, what was that? I need to leave. I felt invited. I felt intrigued. And more than anything, I felt like it had been waiting on me. Just me. I felt like it was telling me, come in, make yourself at home. You're welcome here. I could hear my parents and Em talking underneath the thoughts in my head about what this thing was thinking, what it wanted, what it was. Like I was somewhere else and it was just me and this thing. My parents decided they were thoroughly creeped out though, and without seeing the rest of the house, we left. They told Em they weren't interested, and that was that. We fired her shortly after because she made a habit of showing us abandoned houses in the pitch dark. I was the only person who saw the thing, but my parents, after thinking I was asleep in the car on the way home, started talking about how once they opened the garage door, they felt like they were trespassing, like someone was watching them. It felt colder all of a sudden than the rest of the house. It smelled like rotted meat, and something just wasn't right about that blue light. My ex-girlfriend, while dating, she claimed that she often seen or talked dead people in her dreams whenever she slept at new places, and that often interrupted her sleep. It always happens on the first night, never twice at the same place. I didn't take it seriously because that could just be her imagination. The first night she came over to my apartment, we slept there together. In the next morning, she said there was an old man in her dream. Looked at her and said nothing, but she could feel the sadness through his eyes. I didn't care much. Another time, we went to my hometown and we slept in my own room there. In the next morning, she said she saw a little girl standing in the dark looking at our bed. The little girl seems confused with the "who are you" eyes looking at her. This time my ex-girlfriend couldn't tell if she saw the little girl in her dream or if it was in real life. She didn't remember anything after that and simply woke up in the morning. It's just too realistic to be a dream to her, she said. This time got me concerned. The truth is, I do have a sister. She died before she was born. My mother and I lived in that house since I was a toddler. If my sister was alive, she would live in the same house with us. Anyway, I thought it was just a coincidence with my ex-girlfriend's imagination. Life goes on. A few years later, we broke up. One day, I went back to the old apartment to meet some friends. This time, I learned that indeed there was an old man who painfully died a long time ago. My apartment was built on the very same place where the old man died. Remember what my ex-girlfriend said after her first night here? Made me think. Was it really a coincidence? The old man, the little girl, both did exist in the past. Another side story. My mother and I moved to America not too long after that. A few days before we left the house, my mom had a dream. In her dream, my little sister, already a toddler at that time, was begging her not to leave her. We moved to America and sold the house. I consider myself more as an atheist. I neither believe nor deny the supernatural. I don't have evidence for both and choose to live my life that way. But my ex-girlfriend, the one I loved so much, left me with this story I can never forget. When I was 3, my grandmother, on the maternal side, died of a heart attack, I believe. While at the funeral, the adults were outside talking, smoking cigarettes, etc. Myself, my older brother, and another family member close to our ages were told to stay inside to keep us out of conversation we didn't need to hear, according to my parents. Well, the other family member convinced my brother that locking me in the viewing room, with those red lights over the coffin on, was a good idea. Once they locked me in, the other family member called through the door that Grandma needed to take me with her because I was her favourite. I screamed and cried as loud as my little self could, and some adults took me outside to my parents. I was told that they were just playing, and that even though Grandma loved me, she was never going to take me away. Trying to soothe a very upset 3-year-old. Later that year, we moved 2 states away from there. One night in the new house, 4 years later, I woke up in the middle of the night. According to my mother, very unusual. I heard a song only my grandma sang to me. I sat up, looking around, and I see the lid on my old toy box opening by itself. Once it was fully open, I saw what looked like my grandma standing slowly from inside the box. She turned slowly, creepily, around to look at me. I was frozen in place. I couldn't cry, scream, or even move. She started walking towards me. She stopped close to the bed and said the name she called me. I came to get you. You were always my favourite, and I want you with me now. Somehow I found my voice and I screamed. My mom came running in, and just before she got to my room, Grandma said, "I'll come back for you again," and vanished. My mother came in asking who I was talking to. I told her everything, and Mom let me sleep in the living room for a few nights while she got rid of my toy box. The toy box was the last thing Grandma gave me. I walked into my home office on Tuesday night to do some work around 9:30 p.m. My wife and dogs were in the bed around 9 p.m. When I walked into my office, I found that a drawer from my desk had been removed from its normal place and was lying in front of the doorway. It was moved about 2 feet out from where it would normally be, and then 5 feet over and placed on the ground. Its normal position is on the desk, about 2.5 feet off the floor. What was odd was that the contents of the drawer were all still there, as if someone had removed it and held it from the bottom and set it down relatively gently, instead of just pulling it out of the desk and letting it fall. Time is sort of important because I left the house at 2 p.m. to attend to some meetings, and my wife had left earlier for work. The drawer was in the desk when I left. We both got round about 7 p.m. and had dinner and chatted before she decided to lay down earlier than normal. When I discovered the drawer out of place, the only time it could have happened was between 2 and 7, maybe 9 if this was silently performed. It wouldn't be the result of sleepwalking, since my wife probably wasn't asleep yet. She'd only just gone to lay down. Wanted to address this because someone else I told got really focused on sleepwalking, but no one was asleep yet. My wife said she didn't do it when I spoke with her. I don't think my dogs could have done it without making a mess. I didn't do it. My wife and I have no history of any sort of sleepwalking or paranormal experiences. This is a first for us. Also, nothing else in any room was disturbed or out of place. There was no sign of a break-in or anyone else being in our home. There have been no follow-up weird experiences. I'm an air conditioning and electrical contractor who works with several realtors in my area, doing repairs on homes in escrow. I've been in more than one creepy vacant house. This was in late fall last year. By 4:30 it was already dark. The house was empty, but the lights were on and we proceeded to replace the furnace. My helper got a strange feeling, kind of odd, heavy feeling in the house, and I agreed that I was feeling weird. The house was about 30 years old in a typical subdivision in the North Valleys of Reno, Nevada. I made the comment that a couple of times that afternoon, I thought I'd heard footsteps down the hall. He said he had heard some too, but didn't say anything. We continued to finish up when he pointed down the hallway. There was a figure of a man, but only from the waist up, transparent, entering the front bedroom. We both saw it, and he called out, "Hey, you're not supposed to be here." We checked out the room, but it was empty, window locked. We looked throughout the house, but we were the only ones there. We picked up our hand tools fast and called it a day. It was all I could do to lock up the house fast enough and leave. Talking to the real estate agent the next day, letting him know we'd finished up and the permit inspection was set for the next week, I asked him if he had any history on the house. He explained that the former owner's daughter was selling the place. It seems her mother had died that spring of last year in the house, and a couple of months later, her father had shot himself in the bedroom. He then asked me why, and I said I was just curious. He then tells me his client had told him she had seen her father in the house while she was cleaning it out and thought she was a little nutty. I just kind of uneasily chuckled. I never told him what we saw. Back in 2009, my brother was having trouble with his wife. He came to stay with us for a while. About 2 weeks later, my mother found him sitting, dead, in one of the living room chairs. Turns out it was from a heart attack. About a week later, we would find the kitchen back door wide open. This continued for a few months, about every other day. In the morning, the back door in the kitchen would be wide open to the backyard. One morning in particular stands out to me. It was about 5 a.m. and I went to the kitchen to make a pot of coffee. I was the only one up at the time. The coffee maker was next to the back door. The back door was closed when I started the coffee. When I came back 5 minutes later, the back door was wide open. I stood there for a second and said, "Are you here?" I distinctly heard his voice say, "Yes, I am." That was the only time I heard his voice after he passed. After a while, we started experiencing doors being locked. We would walk out of the front or back door and come back to find yourself locked out of the house. Car keys started to go missing, only to be found in strange places like the kitchen and bathroom drawers. After a few more months, everything settled down at the house, but I'm still convinced it was my brother's spirit hanging around to let us know he was still there. When I was younger, I was more perceptive to the paranormal. I have a few tales of ghosts and other spooky experiences. It's been a while since I've actually seen something. I occasionally get knocking on doors, missing items, or the occasional feeling I'm being watched when there's no one around. My parents' home is definitely haunted. It's older than the city they live in and at the border of an even bigger older city. We've had many experiences there in the 15 years they've lived there. We know the house is haunted by something. What it is, we're not sure. This experience isn't related to it, a different experience altogether. I don't know if this is considered a ghost, to be honest, because who we saw was technically still alive at the time. I think I was still in high school because I was doing homework on the dining room table. My dad and brothers were also in the room watching the TV we have in there. We rented a room in the house to a friend of the family, a large Mexican man. He was taking a shower in the bathroom that was next to the kitchen, adjacent to the dining room. He did this every day after work at around the same time. Behind the kitchen was our den, which had the door to the backyard and my mother's garden. I remember my mom had gone out to the garden. It was getting dark, and my mum suddenly rushed in from the backyard and zoomed past us, and she went upstairs to their room. So fast we didn't see her face. I remember my dad and I looked at each other amused. He even asked, "What's her rush?" 2 minutes passed and the bathroom door opened. It was my mom. She had been the one in the bathroom taking a shower. Our tenants also walked into the house from work at the same moment. My dad immediately got up and went upstairs because obviously someone had broke in. There was no one upstairs. He checked every room. No one left the house either because we had a view of the front door. Our tenant didn't see anyone go out on his way up the street. It really freaked us out. A couple of hours later, we got a call that my aunt, my mom's older sister, had a stroke and was in a coma 2 hours earlier. My aunt looked a lot like my mom, same height and body build. She waited for us basically to travel to her city 6 hours away, to say goodbye and then passed away. We do have something in the house that occasionally mimics people. However, it never mimics someone who doesn't live there. Let me know if you want to read those stories. This was different though, because the thing always leaves you feeling uneasy after seeing it and usually doesn't move. She power walked across 4 rooms and up the stairs. My mom likes to think my aunt tried to say goodbye as she left our world. I like to think that too. I don't know if anyone else has had an experience like this, or if it's considered a ghost. My grandfather passed away when my mom was about 8 years old. He, unfortunately, met the end of his life when he was robbed and killed when he was going to his business very early in the morning. Now that we have that information, let's get into the paranormal experiences, starting with my mother. After my grandfather's passing, give or take 3 months, my great aunt went to visit my grandma and the kids. According to my mother, my great aunt was a loving and caring woman and had a great relationship with my grandparents. One night, while everyone was asleep, my mom woke to the sounds of my great aunt convulsing as if she couldn't breathe. With my mom being so young and unable to understand what was happening, woke up her older brother to tell him what was happening. My uncle went to my grandmother to wake her up, and once she went to check up on my great aunt, she announced that my great aunt had passed away. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm telling you this story. A few months prior to my grandfather's and great aunt's passing, they both had an agreement. The agreement being that whoever passes away first would come back for the other so that they can go to heaven together. For what my mom remembers, she said that when they both agreed to that, it was just a joke. But I guess my grandfather held his of the deal. Fast forward about 35 years. I was in the 4th grade, and during that summer, my mom and I decided to redo my room. After a long day of painting the walls, I had to sleep on the couch in the living room so the paint could dry. My parents' room is right next to the living room, and they offered to leave their door open since they were aware that I was afraid of the dark. That night, I had woken up at some odd hour, and when I turned over on the couch, I was able to see into my parents' room. To my surprise, I see a dark figure in the shape of a man on my mom's side of the bed. A part of me was scared, but the other part of me felt like I knew who this dark figure was. The dark figure was just looking at my mom with a very little I could see in their room, and it looked like the figure was going to lean over and touch my mom's arm. I whispered, "Leave her alone," and turned over, but when I looked back into my parents' room, the dark figure was gone. A few days later, my mom was looking through pictures and shows me one and says, "Oh look, this is what your grandpa looked like." Looking at the photo, I started realizing that the black figure that I thought I knew could have well been my grandfather. Now for my sister's experience. This one comes in the form of dreams. My sister has been stating that a few nights she's been having dreams where in these dreams she wakes up, and when she turns her head to look at the chair in her room, she sees my grandfather looking at her and her son. She says that he only looks at them and smiles. He never says anything to her, but just by his demeanour, she feels safe around him, as if to reassure her that everything is going to be okay. She's still confused as to why he goes to her every so often, and why he never says anything. I was probably 10 or younger when this happened. I was in my house, downstairs in the living room that connected to the kitchen, sitting on the couch in front of the TV. It was turned off. I remember seeing my reflection in the black mirror of the TV and thinking how creepy it was. I don't remember what, but I was playing with something, lost in focus, when suddenly the sun went down. All the lights were off, so it turned almost pitch black, and I was getting a little scared. There were 5 people living in my house at the time, my parents, sister, and grandmother and I, so the lights were always on. The house was always alive and rarely felt empty. Without telling me, my parents and sister had left the house, so it was unusually quiet and dark. Then I heard it. It was a distinct sound. High heel footsteps walking slowly toward me from the kitchen, getting louder and louder. With each step slowly inching closer and getting louder, the presence felt evil. It was getting so loud that I was absolutely horrified, frozen in terror for a few seconds, until I bolted out of the living room and up the staircase. The whole way up was pitch black, and the only light was coming from the cracks of my grandmother's bedroom door. I threw open the door and jumped into the bed next to her, utterly afraid of this evil, invisible woman in high heels. But she never bothered me with her high heels again, although later on she might have tried to scare me by singing in my vents. But that's a story for another time. I lived in this house a little over a year back in 2017. It was a white 2-story house that was obviously old. Our landlords were an old Korean couple who left some items in the house when we were renting it. They included an old painting in the basement, a chest and a mannequin in the attic, which were both wet and smelled funky. I initially felt nothing weird about the house, and I didn't for a while. I've had some experiences beforehand, but not as bad as this house. So let's get to the interesting parts. Activity started to peak a few months into living there, and they were not positive one bit. One night, I was sleeping on the couch in my living room, watching TV. There was a walkway that led into the dining room, which I could see into from the left side, opposite of the staircase, which was on my right. Not a very big living room. We had an Alexa sitting on a little table in the dining room. The Alexa first lit up on its top ring and started playing what sounded like Mexican music. The music played for about 1 minute before completely stopping. The Alexa stayed lit for a few seconds, then turned off. During this time, I was both confused and also scared because no one said anything to activate the Alexa. This wasn't my last experience in the house. Another night in the living room, I heard footsteps coming from the staircase, and I heard a deep growl, like from an animal. I shut my eyes hard and tucked my blanket in to make myself feel safe, because I felt certain I would be attacked. But nothing came, only the intense feeling of being watched while I cowered in fear. Another night, I wanted to go up to use the bathroom. Coincidentally, the light switch for the stairs happened to be up the stairs, meaning I had to walk upstairs in the dark. We had a laundry chute built into the wall on the side. Because I saw nothing, I wasn't aware that the chute was wide open, which slammed shut, making a super loud clapping sound on the polished wood. Startled, I ran right back downstairs and cowered in my blanket on the couch. Whenever I would sleep in my room, I would hear footsteps lightly walking through the hall and making obvious creaks in the floor, always stopping at my bedroom door. Every single night for a week. Each time I texted my dad to check. He would open his door and tell me no one was in front of my door. One incident happened when me, my dad, and brother came home to find boxed light bulbs shattered all over the basement floor. And another incident was when we came home at night, sat down, and heard a loud thud come from the basement. We called the police to investigate, and they found absolutely no one anywhere in the house. Freaky shit. I lived in this house from ages 2 to 13. It was a smaller bungalow. There were 3 small bedrooms down a long hallway that led to the living room. There was a finished basement with a concrete room, which was intended to be used for cold storage. I remember being absolutely horrified of this room. I always used to see shadows of a creature or human-like figure which appeared to be watching me whenever the door was left open. I would refuse to go anywhere near the room and would cry hysterically if I got too close. Additionally, whenever either of my parents went into the basement, I would stand at the top of the stairs screaming bloody murder, begging my parents to not go near the room and to return to the main floor. Upstairs, my room was directly across the small hallway from my parents. I would refuse to enter the hallway at dark, and my mom told me I often would wake up screaming and crying in the night, begging her to sleep in my bed with me, so the shadows wouldn't hurt me. In the living room, I remember playing or watching the TV. Out of the corner of my eye, I would always see an older couple with outfits that appeared to be from the 1800s. The man was wearing a top hat and a black suit that was shorter in the front and longer in the back. The woman was wearing a dress that was wide at the bottom and had a corset top. The couple would pace back and forth down the hallway, often stopping for a couple of seconds before turning around to pace the other way. However, every time I turned my head to confirm what my peripheral vision saw, they would disappear. Up until the day we moved at the age of 13, I refused to be alone in the house due to the grim feeling of being watched that I was overcome with any time I entered the house. I would wait in the backyard for 2 hours until my father got home from work, so I didn't have to be home alone. Immediately after we moved, these feelings and my history of night terrors completely stopped. Fast forward a decade later, now I'm in my 20s. I was having lunch with my mom and her best friend when the topic of our old house came up in conversation. I began telling my mom about how eerie I felt as a kid living there, but quickly brushed it off as being a child with an active imagination when reflecting on the experience as an adult. However, my mom informed me she had the same feelings and odd experiences in that house, but never told me because she didn't want to scare me. My mom began to describe an old couple she would see walking down the hallway. I couldn't believe it. Finishing each other's sentences, we discussed the same couple, almost word for word with the description. My mom even told me she used to have a priest come over every couple of months while I was at school to bless the house. I still consider myself a bit of a skeptic, but it's really hard to explain my mom seeing the same couple as I did, despite never discussing them with each other.
I've come to a point in my life where my mom is trying to tell me all those family secrets I was too young to understand. Every weekend or so, we have these long talks. It was a bit off-putting at first, but I eventually came to value the anecdotes and lessons she gave me. They had the feel of bedtime stories, really, only the protagonists were now my family and people I knew. The implications of the events were very real, and the effects ranged from anger, laughter, to nostalgia. Nostalgia. That's what I first felt when we talked about the old house. That building which has seen many changes in ownership and purpose. That building which has always closed and evacuated exactly after 10 p.m. That building with an old rusty plaque that dates back to 1810. That building was where I lived for most of my childhood. When I found out that many locals thought it was a haunted place, I was confused. My days as a child roaming its halls and corridors, whose heights were unlike any house I'd ever seen, were quite normal and fun to me. I had no memory whatsoever of anything paranormal taking place, not even the classic friend that was but a product of my imagination thing. Doubtful and sometimes mocking faces were the reaction to my uneventful experience. I had just ignored the matter, up until my mom brought it up at one of our talks. Did anything strange ever happen to you or my brothers? Nothing ever happened to me. That was my first question.
And then my mom started from the very beginning. We arrived at the old house when I was about 6. Mom had truly struck a good deal. We could get to live in the ground floor of this massive, 2-storied, beautiful house and pay a small rent if we agreed to help the cleaning lady with the first floor once a month. Maybe it was too good a deal to be true. The owners did not care to mention it, but others warned Mom of the danger. The house was feared. Hair being pulled by an invisible hand, footsteps on the upper floor, knocks on windows whose maker never showed up, stuff out of place and the like. Those were boringly common tropes about haunted old places, and people loved to talk even when they never visited the place themselves, my mom thought. So, she decided to take the offer, although not without a certain degree of dread. But as papers were being signed and furniture being moved, something happened. A neighbour, an old lady that had, as my mum vividly recalled, the habit of looking behind you when talking to you, said, "You'd best be mindful of the girl. She's a devilish one. No two ways about it." And then the neighbour told the tale of a little girl that was buried within one of the walls of the house. Apparently, she had an accident, and, as a weird custom had it, she was made part of the building, so as to make it stronger. As far-fetched as it seemed, my mom took note, perhaps out of fear for this crone-looking figure. But I believe it was mainly due to her strong instinct to protect the family now that Dad took off and ran. It occurred just a day before we slept for the first time at the old house. My mom went to the building all by herself, directly to what would be our washing room. She faced the wall inside of which this girl was supposedly lying. She said a prayer out loud, and then she whispered straight to the white, now turned yellow, peeled off surface. "We mean you no harm. We just want to live here like a true family, so please don't do anything to hurt us." After that, she left our fanciest platter with some candy before the decaying wall, as well as a couple of votive candles. Our very first days at the old house have disappeared in the midst of our memories. If anything scary ever happened, it would have had to be minor so as to be eclipsed by all the great times we had. My mum always kept the girls' platter full of candies and desserts. Whenever she bought or baked something sweet, a bit of it went on the platter. Who would have imagined that I had to share with a ghostly presence? And that seemed to be the end of the otherworldly chapter. But as we reminisced about the important things that transpired at those 6 or 7 years we spent at the house, weird anecdotes started to come to my mum's memory. Since the old house was quite large, it became sort of a hot spot for both my mum's and my big brother's friends. We could have these big, albeit chill parties every month or so. This always seemed strange to my mum. The house was well known for its paranormal happenings, so it would follow that but a few people would want to come visit. Despite that, as I clearly remember, they did want to, and badly so. I personally like to think the ambience we created was usually strong enough to ward off any presence with ill intent. At any rate, on one occasion my brother threw a party in his own living room. Yes, the building actually had an entirely separate and independent small wing. It was late at night. Dudes and gals were dancing to my brother's DJ skills, but then someone came near to talk to him. It was a friend of his, and he claimed to have seen a kid using the rusty, creaking swing that was beyond my brother's place. He went to take a look from the window. The structure of the contraption could be barely made out. Indeed, the seat was moving to the constant creaks, but it was empty. My brother went out to the empty lot I used as a playground during the day. I was completely enclosed by tall, abandoned buildings, so at night the place looked as dark as some beast's throat. He called out to me. No answer was made, and the creaking slowly halted, so he decided to go look for me in my mom's wing, the main wing of the house. Once inside, my mom ran into him, and he told her that the empty lot was a dangerous place for a kid to play at night. She was weirded out. "Dear, your little brother has been sleeping in his room since your friends arrived." He could not believe it. Together they went to pay a visit to my room, to which I answered with the kind of snoring one gets from sleeping too hard. Then who was that kid my friend saw at the swing? I saw the thing moving on its own, I swear. Needless to say, the party moved to the main wing, away from the beast's throat and lit with those really old, beautiful lamps my mom still keeps around. A kid? It gave me goosebumps, although my curiosity was piqued. But did you yourself ever see this kid? Again, she told me she didn't see anything at all, but she did start to remember the time an aunt of hers came by to the old house when we were away. Now, the main entrance to the house was practically stayed as it was during my childhood, a big two-piece black metal gate that was opened using a remote. It was how cars came to a narrow garden and then entered the garage. The gates had a mail netting at the bottom, and it reached low enough for anyone to clearly see the feet of a few people standing nearby at either side. It was a cool feature. As a kid, I liked to try and spot whoever dared to use the doorbell. This very doorbell was no doubt relentlessly pressed by one of my mom's aunts at a certain date. Apparently, she wanted to ask urgently about a piece of gossip. A pair of feet wearing kid shoes greeted her through the netting some minutes in. "Hi dear, is your mom home?" The voice of an infant gave a sharp no. "Well then, would you mind letting me in? I'll wait for her. When is she coming back?" In a hard to describe tone, the person on the other admitted that he didn't know. "I'm locked up. I'm all alone. My mother left me here and I can't get out." The woman felt pity for his grandniece and decided to stay put with him until his mother came home. After a few more minutes, it happened. My mom arrived in her old crimson Cherokee. She gave a honk when she saw her aunt and they both entered the old house. Mom started to unload the groceries while her aunt talked to her. "How could you leave your son like that, all alone? He was very sad. Guess he went into the house." Mom suddenly stopped and frowned. "What are you talking about? He was with me all along." The trunk opened, and there I was, playing with some toys. My grandaunt was incredulous, so she grabbed me by the hand and touched my face, getting more and more pale by the second. She started to babble. It's you. It's really you. You are here." We all went to the living room, but then I left to do something else. My mom told me that it took a couple of chocolates to get her aunt out of the shock. Of course, she now never dared to go even close to the old house. And soon, all of our relatives followed suit. These are the most prominent stories my mom told me. Many other things happened, but they very much more cliche and rather short. But, according to my mom and the friends who were involved, they did happen. And, as if that wasn't enough, you've got some facts. The old house has never been again used as a house. Only businesses have set up shop, but a lot of them have left rather quickly. Nowadays, there's a restaurant bar, although I've heard stories that point to something weird taking place. At 9 p.m, all patrons are asked to leave, even during weekends. That's right. Keep in mind that most businesses of their kind make a lot of their profit during these crucial hours. A friend of the family had this evacuation happen to him, to which he asked why. One of the waiters told him that they all left the building before 10 p.m. because of the terrifying things that occurred after. Apart from that, let's not forget that the house is at least 200 years old or so. A faded plaque at the front says that the building is meant to honour some local cavalry unit of the Independence War. Frankly, I don't know what to think of all this. Maybe I should just let it go, as it really doesn't bother me, and I can't remember anything weird happening to me. Nonetheless, I'm about to start an important chapter in my life, one that may take me away from my hometown and friends for a long time. Wouldn't it be nice if I could look more into this, so as to indulge in a bit of nostalgia and just maybe begin a journey of self-discovery? It is also intriguing to know why it is that all close relatives, meaning mom, my brother, my sister and myself, didn't have anything bad or scary happen directly to us. Is it because of the ritual my mom did regularly? What about the playful boy and the girl that was supposedly buried within one of the walls? Shortly after my son turned 2, but before he could talk well enough to understand, he would run out of his own room, slam the door, and wouldn't go back in. He would just point and say, "Gum, gum," like an exaggerated swallowing noise. It took us a few months to figure out what it was he was so afraid of, and I made a point not to tell his mother what I thought it was until she came to the same conclusion. We agreed we had a resident spooky boy. My son used to talk about him on a daily basis and wouldn't play in his room or want to sleep in there. We decided to burn sage and smudge the room and the rest of the apartment while he was at daycare. The next day, he started playing in his room. Eventually, I got my son to work up the confidence to say, "Go away," when he saw him or was afraid. He'd always let us know by pointing and saying its name to let us know it was around. During COVID, my estranged father came up from Texas and started staying with us. A few weeks in, he asked me what about my son was talking about when he'd say "gum gum," and that he was talking about punching "gum gum." I told him that it was my son's imagination, to which he replied, "I don't think he's imagining that, buddy." My son can clearly communicate now, and rarely brings him up anymore. I've pressed him for details like what does he look like, where he lives, etc. My son says he still lives in the ceiling in his room, but he doesn't come around. And says he's scary, but nice. My dad always said that if he ever died in the apartment, he'd whoop his ass for scaring our son. He contracted COVID and ultimately succumbed to the disease in December. I keep his urn in my son's bedroom, and Gum Gum hasn't been around since. We have a semi-rural house, which is very dark and quiet at night. I lived there for 2 years. I was frequently alone, and I never heard or felt a thing. I moved an hour away for work, and my youngest son moved into the master bedroom. His girlfriend is there most of the time too. So, they started telling me a while back that they were hearing things. Footsteps in the hall, knocking on the wall in the bedroom. I honestly thought they were imagining it, although my son is the epitome of show me proof or it's not real. I had a car accident recently and stayed at the house for a while. Sleeping in the spare room one night, reading a book, and I heard footsteps. Something moving up and down the hall. I've always been one just to get up and check something, but this froze me. I was terrified and absolutely certain that the door was about to open. Just thinking about it makes my heart race. My son's girlfriend is a realtor, so she did some research to see if there's anything about the house, and there's nothing. My ex's brother died in a car accident at 18, and we've all seen flashes of him, but this feel malevolent, or at best, not friendly. So this happened 2 years ago to me and my older brother. A while back, we were living in our mum's house, who was gone due to work-related stuff, but our aunt, our cousins, and her boyfriend lived with us. Well, not long after they found their own house and left, so it was just us two, and sometimes our grandma was there, and we were in our mid-teens, so we were capable of handling ourselves. Now time for the story. It was a regular night. I was in our living room, while my brother was in the room. We didn't have cable, but we had internet, so I would hook up my laptop to the TV and play Hulu. Well, the episode was over, so I got to click from the next one when I saw it. It was a pitch black figure peeking over the corner in our hallway. I stood still, not knowing what to do, but started backing up when finally it just left. I was scared, but I didn't tell my brother, so I continued to watch TV. 5 minutes later, my brother comes out of his room scared, and I ask what's wrong, and he says, "I just saw 2 small black figures peeking from the corner of the hallway, looking at me." My stomach just dropped. I explained to him that I just saw something just like that a few minutes ago. We stayed together the rest of that night, and nothing else happened. However, there was something that I didn't realize until I was getting ready for bed. He said 2 small figures, almost kid-like. The one I saw was mid-height, like an average adult. Did we see a parent and 2 kids? As of right now, we're out of that house back with our mom, and luckily, no ghost. So back in childhood, when my brother was maybe 6 or 7, he would make claims of seeing weird people. He was pale grey, long fingers, and just looked like he was decaying. It wasn't until he got older he assumed it was a ghost or something, but he never saw it again. Well, it wasn't over. My cousin, who was 5, said she was scared because she saw somebody outside the other day. Of course, as the big cousins we were, me and my brother asked her what she saw, and what she said was the following. He looked grey, had long fingers, and his skin looked weird. My brother and I each gave each other a look we did. Told her not to worry, it was nothing, and luckily she didn't see it again. But the thought still haunts us. Was it the same guy my brother saw when he was a kid? And if so, how long has it been with us? Do you think it was the same guy or some ghost who just copied a memory or something? One day, I was awake around 1 a.m. and my cousin, who is my aunt's oldest, 7 years old, woke up. She cuddled in the blanket next to me and watched TV with me. I ended up going to the bathroom, so as I got up, she grabbed my arm and practically begged me not to leave. I told her, don't worry, I'll be quick. I come back out a minute later and she was hid under the blanket. I took it off her head and she had tears coming down and pointed at the window. We were in the living room, so the window was to our front patio. I went to look and saw nothing, so I laid next to her and we fell asleep, but the story's not over. The next day, my brother and I, along with my cousins, went to see my mom and her boyfriend. We explained the weird stuff, and they gave us sage, I believe it was, and I told them about what happened with my cousin. My mom's boyfriend tried asking her what she saw, and she whispered into his ears, but just started bawling in tears. I was heartbroken. We asked what she said, but apparently she barely started talking when she ended crying. We never brought it up with her, fearing she will cry again. She's 9 now, and I feel like I want to ask her, but she saw if she even remembers. The one thing that made me more sad was she begged me not to leave, but I still went. And she had to see what she saw alone. And scared, luckily, we're all out of that house. I am part of a paranormal team in Northern Ireland called Northwest Paranormal Research. We visit haunted locations all over the island of Ireland. But this one is probably the worst of all. We parked the cars about 500 feet from the actual house. We walked up a bit of the road, then up the lane where, at the time, was all lined with a dense forest. We go inside the run-down old cottage. No power or anything there. We set up our gear. A locked-off camera and a microphone in each of the 3 rooms. We settle down in the centre room, where the open fireplace is. I have my laptop running, recording from all the microphones. So, we settle down and do some EVPs. 3-minute bursts. In a few, we get what we think are replays, but on amplifying it, sounds like animals around the house. Around 11:30, we're all sitting on our chairs having a break, coffee and sandwiches, when we hear a loud this from the bedroom beside us. We all jump and run in. With all the torches on, we look around to see what we could have made such a noise. But there's nothing of such a weight to do so. So in our heads, we're all thinking, it's all going to kick off now. But it doesn't. Not for another 20 minutes. It gets cold, and I mean Arctic cold. We can see our breath, yet the ambient temperature is 8 degrees Celsius. We hear little ticks, like someone throwing rice or something at us, but we can't see anything. We have 2 night vision cameras, and there's nothing showing up on those either. Then, from the laptop, we can see spikes in the audio, but we can't actually hear anything with our ears. There's definitely something going on, but we can't nail it down. Then Simeth hears somebody calling her name being whispered into her ear. Then I hear mine. But we have no recorded evidence of this, despite having all the tech with us. We pull out a small table and a glass to do divination. And no, this is not like a Ouija board, this is a simpler form of communication. As we have our fingers on the glass, we ask out, is there anyone out there who will or would like to communicate? The glass immediately starts to swing violently about the table. We ask for the glass to stop, but it doesn't. We decide that it's getting a bit too intense, so we pack up and decide to leave. On our way down from the lane, we were just chatting amongst ourselves about the goings on. As we cross the ditch at the bottom, I hear these chilling words roared at me right into my ear. Never return. We haven't been back since. Other people have and experienced bad things, but we will never return. So it's the year 2000. My parents just had my little sister, and we were in need of a house with an extra bedroom. We find a decent house in a good neighbourhood, and the place seems pretty relaxed. The basement was always a weird place for me though. Always felt like there was someone else down there, watching. The first time I actually saw something, I wasn't alone. My sister, 3 friends and myself were in the basement watching Jurassic Park. Our parents were upstairs in the kitchen playing cards. During the movie, the power cut out. Something small and white comes creeping out from beside the couch we're all sitting on. It resembled a crawling baby. I just remember staring at it, trying to figure out what I was seeing. I was terrified. After a moment of pause, it fucking hissed at us. And then boom, lights were back on and we started screaming. We ran upstairs to our parents and explained what just happened. Of course, they didn't believe us. Honestly, I probably wouldn't have either. From that point on, things became more frequent and pronounced. Regular occurrences included creaking stairs at night, having a feeling of dread or panic in the downstairs bathroom. For our guests, seriously, people were freaked out being in there. Feeling something behind you in the basement and kitchen, things being misplaced after using them, hearing loud whispers directly in my ear that would wake me up at night. This is the reason I still sleep with the covers over my ears at age 26. Seeing things moving in peripheral vision, and super cold spots throughout the house. Years of experience, and my parents never believed me about any of them. Fast forward to 2017, and I'm moving in with my boyfriend with the help of our friends. Our friend Ali makes a sudden realization that she's not only been to my parents' house before, but that her best friend's family were the previous owners of the home. Weird coincidence, right? Buckle up, y'all. So, moving day has come and gone. The buds all get together to hang out. Myself, Ali, and another friend are discussing weird childhood experiences when I began talking about the aforementioned baby-like being from the basement. Ali starts tearing up and insists that she needs to text her best friend to clarify something. After getting her reply, she turned to me. Hey, do you happen to remember the last name of the family that lived in your house? Yeah, last name. Now she's actually crying and visibly shaken. Then she told me why. Turns out, the previous family had been expecting another child and unfortunately, it was stillborn. Hearing that was probably the most surreal moment of my life. When I called my parents to tell them what I found out, and to prove I wasn't crazy all these years, their skeptic selves literally had nothing to say other than, that's definitely weird. So yeah, there's finally some validity to my claims, and I don't really feel good about it. TLDR, my friends and I saw the ghost of a baby in my parents' house, and it turned out that the previous owners had a stillborn while living there.
When I was about 11 or 12, my two friends and I had the great idea of playing with a Ouija board. The rest of the night was a mess. Before I explain what happened, here's a little backstory on the board we used. The board belonged to my sister, Dee, of one of the friends involved in this story. While she and a friend were using it, the board was put away without saying goodbye first. Whatever was talking to them that day freaked Dee's friend out enough to pretty much throw the board back into the box and close it up. I did some reading, and apparently, ending a Ouija board conversation without saying goodbye can result in something either latching onto you or the board itself. We were stupid enough to use the same board. My friend Eri was invited to spend the night at my house. Being the little badasses that we thought we were, we decided we'd play with the Ouija board. Our friend Ryan lived across the street from me, so we called him to join us. We started playing and asked if there was anyone with us, if they wanted to tell us their name. The planchette spelled out Andree. Okay, cool. My middle name. At this point, I was sure that Eri was messing with me. YOUMUSTRUN. Just remembering and writing that gave me the chills. So obviously, we're pretty much done. And talking to spirits and saying goodbye. Nope the fuck out. Decided we'd go across the street back to Ryan's. At the time, the property behind his house was vacant, and a small chain link fence was the only thing keeping us from exploring. So we did. Eri's always had great intuition, and when she says we need to go, it's time to go. She started to feel uneasy being in the vacant backyard and returned to the other side of the fence. I followed. There was a growing tension in that yard. Suddenly, we both got a feeling that something bad is going to happen. We start yelling for Ryan to come back over, but he thought we were freaking out over nothing. We finally convinced him to come back and started helping him over the fence to speed things up. We were chunky kids. Eri and I each had a grip on either of his arms when we suddenly felt a lot of resistance. Ryan's hood was being pulled back by something unseen, and he was audibly gasping for air. I don't know if one of us reached to grab his hood while the other pulled him over, but we managed to get him back onto his property, and he could finally breathe. He was disturbed and just wanted to go back in his house for the night. Eri and I parted ways with him and went back to my house for our sleepover. We talked about what had happened, but since we were kids, the situation was now funny and cool. It wasn't. Due to my past issues with sharing a bed with someone, I slept on the floor and gave her my bed. When I woke up in the morning, I had 3 long scratches on both sides of my pelvis waist. I'd slept alone. Eri couldn't have done it. It looked like deep cat scratches, but my cat was declawed, not my choice. I had never scratched myself like that. It never happened again, but it's something I still think about to this day. I had a few things happen in the duplex apartment I lived in with my sister, Mom, and occasionally my mom's ex-husband when they were off and on when I was little. The first thing that happened, one night I was asleep in bed, but I was having an awful dream. The sky was dark blood red, and there was a lot of lawnmowers sitting around, covered in blood as well. It scared me enough that I woke up, and after a few minutes of trying to decide if I should go in with my mom and sleep, I decided to try and close my eyes again. Before I could close my eyes, I saw 2 figures float out of my wall. One of them was a little girl with a Victorian maybe style dress and curly blonde hair. The other was a black mask that I could tell was a man, but it had no face. I had a very intense feeling that the little girl did not want to be with the man. I could feel a fear from her almost. As quickly as they appeared, they turned and walked back into the wall. I ended up dragging my sister with me into my mom's room, where she revealed she'd seen something too, but didn't know what it was. We slept with my mom that night. The second experience in that duplex, my sister and I were sitting on the stairs. Right around the corner of the stairs was the little attic type thing that we would always find objects that had gone missing. Keys, silverware, etc. Well, While we were sitting, my sister was a step above me, sitting facing me, and we were talking. Suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder, and it gave me such a hard shove that I tumbled down the stairs, and then ended up with both of my eyes being blackened. After the stairs incident, my mom was frightened enough to move out of the duplex. However, I've always felt sensitive to do things ever since. I always feel like I see things, and if I have my back turned in bed, I feel extremely uneasy and scared and have to face outward toward the open door. I've also wondered if something could be the cause of my severe anxiety and depression that developed during my childhood. Edit. I recently had to move my mirror to the other side of the door as well due to getting a very uneasy and anxious feeling with it pointing anywhere near my bed. I have heard plenty of stories of people who have predicted their death. Now it's my turn to share some death predictions I've heard that came true. I work as the lead social worker in a nursing home. Now, there's nothing inherently scary about working in a nursing home, or just nursing homes in general, other than the occasional horrendous smell that will knock your socks off. But in the time I've been working as the head social worker at my nursing facility, I've had 2 residents predict their own death. One of them isn't terribly creepy, mainly just sad. The other one gives me the creeps. We'll start with the not terribly creepy one. This particular resident had been there for a bit, and were there for long-term care. They were fairly young, below the age of 60. They were there because their medical issues made it difficult for them to live independently. I started being their social worker during the COVID-19 pandemic. And at the time of this incident, it was around December 2020, getting close to Christmas. The resident was in a fairly stable condition. No major health problems that were going to cause imminent death. By all means, they would have lived a lot longer had it not been the circumstances around their death. But I will not provide detailed information on what happened. One day, I was chatting with the residents when they asked if they could go home to visit their family for the holidays. With the ongoing pandemic, it was policy that residents could not go on outings for the potentiality that they could come back and cause an outbreak. So I sadly had to tell the resident no, they could not go home for the holidays. The resident began to sob, and I did my best to comfort them. I enlisted the help of the DON, Director of Nursing, to try to settle them. As we were talking to the sobbing resident, the resident confided that they were utterly sure they would not live to see the next Christmas. We did our best to reassure the resident they were in a stable condition, that there was nothing wrong that would cause them to die within the next year. But unfortunately, due to a lot of sudden and conflicting factors, the resident passed away 2 weeks later. Now the second story. This resident was probably somewhere in their 60s. Resident had numerous health issues, but since they were providing nursing care and rehabilitation, it was assumed that they would get to go home with their spouse. One day, while chatting with a nurse on the residence hall, I heard the resident cry out. I walked over to their room and they were in a fetal position on their bed, with an utter look of terror and dread on their face. I immediately asked what was wrong, if I needed to fetch their nurse. The resident looked at me and said there were people just outside the door talking about how the resident was going to die soon, and how they were going to dig the resident's grave. I attempted to reassure the resident that no one was talking about the resident dying. There was no one there talking about digging the resident's grave. I had just been fairly close to their room, and the conversation between the nurse and I had nothing to do with the residents, let alone dying and digging their grave. The resident seemed to calm down a bit, and things proceeded as normal. But just days later, the resident was transferred to the hospital, where they died shortly after. It still haunts me. What entities were outside that resident's door? As an adult in my mid-20s, I was my bestie's babysitter. I babysat her little boy who at the time was around 1. Not all the time, just for date nights.
As social workers, we are overly cautious who watch our children. As you can imagine, we've heard the worst. So, watching H at bedtime. After playing downstairs for a bit, we go upstairs so I can bathe him before bed. We bathe, and then I'm drying him off on the floor and playing peekaboo. I then hear something downstairs, some movement, and the dog starts barking. It's a little yappy dog, and he barks all the time, but this time, he wouldn't stop. So then, I think, maybe they're just home early. But the dog keeps barking incessantly, not pausing, just going crazy. I'm still drying off H, and I pick him up and I hear clear as day downstairs a male yelling, "Stop barking at that monkey." The dog instantly stops barking. I then wait, because I'm thinking it's my bestie's husband. No one comes upstairs. I then get this feeling that creeps up my spine, and I just realise it is not my bestie and her husband. They are not home. I start to panic because I'm thinking a stranger has broken into the house. I start looking for somewhere to hide H in the bathroom because my cell phone is downstairs and I want him to be safe. I'm shaking, I'm so terrified. I then decide, fuck it, I'm bringing H with me because I think he'll be hurt if I leave him by himself. I pick up H, still wrapped in a towel, and take a deep breath. I build up the courage to run downstairs to find my phone. I open the door and I run with that baby like I've never run before. I grab my phone on the counter and then run back upstairs. I text my bestie, who says she'll be home in 20. I search the house. I don't find anything. She comes home. I tell her and her husband what happened. They both look at each other and kind of nod. I'm like, what the fuck? First they tell me they call H monkey at bedtime. They both then proceed to tell me how they think the house is haunted, and about stuff that happens all the time. Cigar smoke smells, stuff being moved and disappearing, etc. It had never been talked before though. I was shook. We're still great friends to this day, but you bet your ass I did not babysit again. When I was a child, my mother had to move us out in an abusive household with her boyfriend. Being poor in rural eastern Kentucky, we didn't have many housing options at the time, so she got some assistance to have us a house built on my family's property through the government. This was a fully new place, so it was hardly one that you would assume would be haunted, like with a history. But after it was built and we finally moved in, very unexplainable things began to happen to us while we were there. The first thing that ever happened to me was the attic door being ripped open and slamming shut while I was home alone. My mother and my older sister were taking my younger brother to the doctor, and as my uncle lived next door to us, she let me stay home by myself. The strange thing about it is that it wasn't a normal door. If it were, I would just assume it was a draft of wind or something. The opening to our attic was a cutout in the ceiling though, and the door was a thick, whole piece of plywood, one that I could barely lift up myself when I went up there. This thing lifted from the side, like it did when we went upstairs, and then slammed shut, followed by loud, thumping footsteps on our stairs. As soon as it lifted, I looked up at it. I could see straight up into the attic and never saw anyone or anything come down those steps, not even a shadow. The footsteps stopped at the last step, and then everything went silent, leaving me terrified and wondering what the hell just happened. Second experience was seen by the whole family. I have to explain here that at the time I was 10, my sister 14, and my little brother 6, and we were all below 5'5". My mother is only 5'1", so this would have been impossible for any of us to do. Our back door was in our kitchen, and it stood at a height of 6'5", as most standard doors do. The weird thing is, after 6 months of living there, we began to notice a handprint well above the door frame, like someone had slapped it as they walked through. Seeing as none of us could reach it, even standing in a chair, my uncle came to investigate it, telling my mother that it was car grease and the oil that the print was made of. There was no man in our house at the time.
My mother was divorced, and my father was currently going through cancer treatments that only came to the house 3 times before he died. No one visited that was tall enough to reach that area, and most of the men in my family are 5'7" and under. The last experience I'll tell you about happened when our house unfortunately burned down. As I said before, we were poor, and the only heat we had was a kerosene heater, and one that sadly was in a bad shape. Needless to say, the heater caught fire one evening, catching the rest of the house up quickly. My mother had enough time to grab the 3 of us and get out of the house, closing the back door behind her as she went. Our steps at that door were not connected to the house, so when someone walked down them, they would move away and slam back into the house when you stepped off. Once we were in the yard though, the back door slammed open and then slammed shut once more, and the steps moved forward as if someone was on them, and then slammed back against the wall. We never saw anyone leave that house. That door opened to an empty, ablaze room and slammed shut again. Those steps moved, but there wasn't anyone on them. And to this day, I still have no idea what the fuck was actually going on in that house. There are way more incidents, but I feel as if these 3 tell the most about the situation. I can't logically figure out what was going on. I've tried over the years, tried to come up with logical explanations for all the stuff that went on, but I've never been able to. So I'm a practicing witch. I have been for several years, and one of my first spells was one of the ones that I could never forget. I was trying to do a love spell, which includes bringing your energy out to get that loving energy attracted towards you. However, I was in a really dark place at that time with depression, so I believed that what I sent out was negative energy, and I think I got it back. That night after I did the spell, something felt different in my room. It felt heavier in the air. I was on my computer in bed and all of a sudden I felt burning going up my arm. When I looked, it had a few fresh scratches. I took a pic, but it was on my old phone from about 3 years ago, and I can't find it. I wish I could show it to everyone. But I checked everywhere on my bed on how it could happen, even though my arm was perfectly still in front of me and none of my animals was in my room or gone near me that day. I couldn't find anything sharp around that could have done this, so I was freaked out. Later that night, my dog and cat came into my room and sat on the end of the bed. And then all of a sudden, they were staring at my door, growling and hissing at my doorway, which they've never done before, so I was a bit confused. And then they both ran out of the room. They weren't fighting or anything, it was like something scared them off. I was weirded out. When I fell asleep, I had a horrible nightmare of dead bodies in a room with a scary looking plague doctor standing in the middle of them, and I could hear whispers around me going on about a murderous plague doctor, which I guessed was the one I was seeing. I could also smell rotting fish and, weirdly, lavender. When I woke up, there were loads of flies all over me, which never happened beforehand. I screamed and flicked them all away. I was trying to smell my room and my house to see if anything was rotting, and that's why I had flies all over me. I could smell rotting flesh in my dreams, and I couldn't smell anything. I even had a shower to make sure it wasn't me. The heaviness in my room was still strong, almost like something was watching me. I was freaked out, and my animals were still acting up, staring at my door, hissing and barking, and I just felt drained. And for several nights I had the same nightmare and woke up with flies all over me. I checked and checked again to see if anything was causing the flies to come and washing myself more and more, but I couldn't find anything and they kept coming back. This happened for 5 days in a row. I'd had enough at this point and I was convinced it was some sort of negative spirit. That day I cleansed my room and my house the best way I could with my practice, and did the best I could, and when I was starting the cleansing, more scratches ended up on my leg. I felt like I definitely didn't want to go. When I completed my ritual and cleansing for banishing everything, felt calmer and lighter. My animals stopped acting strange. No more scratches, no more flies.
No more of the feeling I was being watched, and definitely no more nightmares, and I didn't feel drained. I was curious about plague doctors after that, and found out they used flowers such as lavender in their breaks to mask the smell of the plague, and my jaw dropped. Only some of my close family and my boyfriend knows about this, as it's very personal and very real to me. But I thought I'd share it now, after all this time. I grew up in a farmhouse that was built in the early 1800s. I lived there with my brother and my parents up until I was 10. I was young, so some of my experiences seem very foggy, so I'm going to share the experiences my family encountered. A little backstory to the house. Multiple people had been killed there. A lady was shot behind our garage, and someone fell down our steps and snapped their neck. That's basically all I know about the house. It was located in the middle of nowhere, with woods behind it, with a very old house and a garage that was still visible. Our farmhouse has 2 stories, with a dirt basement that had walls that were still made out of lead. One time, my brother woke up late at night. His room was on the 2nd story, facing our backyard. Outside his window was the roof of our porch, and for some reason he opened his curtains to spot a lady waving her arms back and forth over and over on the roof of the porch. He was young, so you can pretty much expect his reaction. My sister, who didn't live with us but often slept over, fell asleep on our couch in the living room one night. She woke up late into the night. Our living room was connected to our dining room and saw by our computer, which was right next to the couch, the apparition of a little girl who was staring at her. She didn't give many details, but said she ran up the stairs to my room and hid on top of my bunk bed. My mum had more encounters than anybody. My mum is a very spiritual individual. She feels very connected to the spiritual realm. When we began moving out to the farmhouse, she believes the spirits became angry with her and our family. She woke up one morning when she would switch her position to face the doorway to her room, where she had seen a dark figure staring straight at her. She claimed this felt as if it was going on for minutes, until out of nowhere, the figure leaped in one swift motion straight to her and suddenly disappeared. The thing about my childhood home is that I never felt alone. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. I'm pretty sure I welcomed a spirit into my home when I was 7 years old. My house is close to 30 years old. It's my childhood home, and my parents have been the only owners. They watched our house be built. Since I was 7, we've had various paranormal activity, and my mom, dad, and I are all believers. We always have been. Growing up, the type of activity my family and I experience has been objects quite literally moving in front of us, voices talking, whispers, lights being manipulated, multiple lights in our home being turned on and off at once, the spirit kicking the back of my mom's recliner while she slept, seeing shadowy figures and other apparitions, relentless and harsh footsteps stomping upstairs in my parents' room that can be heard from the family room downstairs, music boxes being manipulated to play music, the ones you have to manually turn yourself to play, a spirit twisting and turning the doorknob to my room back and forth in the middle of the night. My room was locked, thank God, and other weird but smaller occurrences. Long story short, the most common activity out of the list was the footsteps and stomping upstairs. It used to occur so frequently that my mom and I became immune and desensitized to it. I'm talking like it happened almost every day for years. My mom and I experienced it the most because she was a stay-at-home mom and my dad worked a lot. When I was around 12 years old, the activity just seemed to stop completely. None of us experienced anything for the next 10 years. About 4 months ago, when I was home alone, I was downstairs having breakfast and some coffee. The TV was off and the only noise in the house was my phone because I was on TikTok. I began hearing noises. I paused my phone and the all too familiar footsteps and stomping was happening upstairs in my parents' room, for the first time in 10 years. It went on for about 20 minutes. The next week, when I was home alone, TV off, having breakfast, the exact same scenario. The footsteps and stomping happened again. However, I haven't experienced anything in the last 3.5 months. I did tell my mom about all of this, but she hasn't been experiencing anything. This last weekend, I was gone at my boyfriend's house. I come home this morning, and my mom tells me that her and my father had been hearing the footsteps and stomping in their room for the past 2 nights. My mom said that Saturday night, at around 10:30 when she was in bed, she heard a loud crash that seemed like it came from my side of the house. My dogs went off and started barking, but my mom did not want to get up and investigate. Sunday, my mom opened the door to my room to finally see what had caused the noise from the previous night. Basically, I have a tall bookshelf across from the door to my room. On the top shelf, I have a cute filer for my important paperwork sitting on the back of the shelf, and then 4 Lennox Kate Spade wine glasses that I collect, which are on display. They are wrapped up in the boxes they come in. Lastly, I have 2 festive hats that I wore recently during the 4th of July weekend that I had set up on top of my filer, for lack of a permanent spot for them yet. Continuing, when my mom opened the door was immediately pushing my hats, which had somehow flown across the room and landed on the ground. Then she saw that all 4 of my wine glasses in their boxes were on the ground. Luckily, only one had broken from the impact. This is a new experience. I'm curious to know why the spirit has essentially targeted my belongings. The spirit had flung my hat across the room and swiped my wine glasses off the shelf. We lived in a farmhouse built in the early 1800s. The place was filled with odd energy. Any family or friends that came over noticed this as well. This place was beyond paranormal. One time my mother was holding me as a baby, home alone. Lightning struck our house, and my mother told me it was like her memory erased for an hour. She didn't know who she was. She didn't know who I was. She regained her memory shortly after, but for some reason remembers this encounter. We don't know to this day if it's affiliated with anything paranormal, but I thought I'd share it with you to get a glimpse of the bizarreness of the household. As we began moving away, family complications, it's like the energy switched from friendly to more conniving. We felt targeted, and my stepdad started coming over. I was around 10 at the time, and my mom and him would often sleep overnight on the couch. My stepdad would wake up in the middle of the night and sit upright on the couch. I'm not sure what drove him to waking up, but he remembers laying his head down on his palm while he was sitting, and he remembers my mother talking to him. He didn't look to his side, but he remembers her voice and even his scratching his back. But he looked over to discover my mother had still been sleeping. I'm not sure if he was just tired and hallucinating, but from past experiences, this doesn't surprise me. This wasn't only happening to my mother, this even happened to me. I remember playing in the backyard with some Nerf guns with my brother. Our porch was visible from the side, and I had a strange feeling about the porch. I was used to these feelings, so I looked up to the porch to see myself, but it was completely black, so it stood out and was noticeable as it was day out. I know that thing was me. It had my body type and everything. I know the human brain likes to create fake memories. Maybe these are fake, but I have my family to back me up on these stories, which makes me feel less insane. Many moons ago, about 3 or 4 years ago now, I was working maintenance in a motel at a young age to get experience, and after a few weeks of training, I was let off the leash to work on my own. My work times were on the weekends when businesses were fast-paced, but this time round, it was rather slow. The front desk had radioed me in a request to check on a second-floor room in the front building since the AC was acting up. To put a premise down, this was an outside motel. As I made my way inside the room with tools and stepladder in hand, I propped open the door so it wouldn't get too hot while I was working. As I hopped up with my back to the door and started pulling the vent off to check for issues, a strange sound started occurring. Singing. For a second, I figured it was my phone since I normally had music playing, and as I pulled it out, nothing. The singing got closer to me, and as it became more clear, I recognised it was the singing of a child and quickly jumped down to run out of the door to check my surroundings. At some point during my mad dash, it must have stopped because by the time I reached the door and swerved my head, there was no sound. I merely wrote it off as being the heat getting to me over the course of the day, so I walked back towards the vent. Right as I got up to the ladder and my boot touched the first step, the singing started again, but this time, it was right next to me. Kicking the ladder away and jumping back against the wall, my heart reached speeds I didn't think was possible. As my eyes scanned the room as fast as possible, looking for the source to be anything, forcing my back to the wall, I heard quite clearly what could be best described as the child's lullaby, with laughter being sung softly in my ear. Thrusting myself off the wall, I sprinted and made my way downstairs towards the front desk area in a panic. By the time I made it to them and explained what happened, they told me, "Singing? That's odd, because as far as we know, there's no one left in the building aside from us down here, and we didn't hear anything aside the stomping and running you did." After letting myself calm down and laughing it off with a bit of my co-workers, my manager came out after hearing us only to ask, "Huh? You're telling me that singing I heard wasn't you then?" So this story happened to my uncle in the 80s, and I thought I'd share. Background: my uncle has always been sensitive to the paranormal, and so are his kids, but the portal to Hell Mirror is a story for another day. One hot August night in the 80s, my uncle stayed with his friends to drink and hang out. There was an old mattress in the attic, so when it came time to sleep, he took a blanket and pillow up there to pass out. He slept up there alone in the August New England heat, but managed to pass out eventually. Then, later in the night, he awoke, shivering, feeling like he was being watched. He couldn't understand how it got so cold when he went to bed sweating in an attic with no AC. He turned to face the ceiling, and that's when he saw it. Standing over him was a shadow of a man in a top hat with two red eyes. My uncle was paralysed with fear, just staring at this imposing figure bearing down on him. And then it spoke. "I killed you once and I can kill you again," it said. The man in the top hat then fell through my uncle, giving him a freezing chill through his body as the shadow went through the attic floor. My uncle put his arms up, thinking he was about to get attacked, but all he felt was the cold whoosh. He believes it may be a demon from a past life that came to haunt him, but I don't know any other encounter he's had with the top hat demon. But I do think it was supernatural. He could still move, so I don't think it was sleep paralysis, and he's had some other ghost visitors throughout his life, so believe it. My uncle was visited by a demon in a top hat that threatened to kill him again.